9 a.m., Hillstonborough, inside a high-class hotel. Klein picked up a bottle of exquisitely packaged white wine as he handed it over to the elder opposite him. Mr. Xianxia, thank you for coming. This is a gift of mine. Please accept it. At the latest, I'll make my decision by tomorrow. When the time comes, I might come and visit you in person. He was using such a euphemistic manner to inform the man that he had failed to be selected. To be frank, he was actually rather pleased with Mr. Xianxia. He perfectly met his image of a butler, stern, well-mannered, professional, a high level of mental understanding, and is good at handling all kinds of thorny issues. As the oldest candidate who lived the furthest away, he had arrived half an hour ahead of time. He had been patiently waiting outside while Rebecca and Walter were only 15 minutes early. If not for Aurorareads mentioning that the latter two allowed for additional developments, Klein felt that he would have chosen this old gentleman. After all, his main goal was to use the butler's social connections to more easily enter high society so as to make contact with the corresponding targets. The white wine was specially bought from the Srenzo restaurant, costing him £2 since he knew someone was destined to be disappointed while wasting money to travel to and fro by carriage. This could effectively accentuate how generous Duane Dantes was and how gentlemanly he was as a mysterious tycoon. In addition, he didn't think it was right to belittle a butler from a noble family. Such people definitely knew plenty of people in high society, many professional butlers, and countless servants due to their past professional experiences. They covered the entire spectrum of people, and they could affect a gentleman's image, and this was a necessary consideration for entering even higher social circles. At present, the 55-year-old Xianxia had plenty of white hair. His blue eyes were ingrained with the wisdom that time had given him, so he didn't reject Duane Dantes's gift. He received it and glanced at it before bowing. I love white wine from Garrod. Thank you for your kindness. Your grace is admirable. Garrod? Yes, the waiter yesterday mentioned that it's a brewery in Intis's Champagne province. It's well known for producing high-end grape wine. Some of the wine of certain vintage years are considered top-notch. Sigh, a butler knows more about wine than me. That's right. Mr. Xianxia had mentioned that wine cellars are directly under the charge of the butler or a butler assistant among nobles and the rich. Does this mean that I need to have a wine cellar in the future? Wine costing £2 is at the bottom of the totem pole, while even Aurora red wine from 1330 which costs £126 isn't even considered the best. How much would such a wine cellar cost? As he thought it over, Klein felt heavy in the chest. He began to suspect that the £2,888 he had set aside from the gold coins weren't going to last long. If not for the training he had during his time as a clown, he definitely would have lost his cool and not reply with a smile. Your fondness for it is the greatest form of praise for me. Mr. Xianxia, please invite Mr. Rebecca who's at the coffee house below up. Xianxia didn't hesitate to agree to it. Less than 5 minutes later, Rebecca knocked on the door and entered the living room. This gentleman had his blonde hair combed neatly. The edges of his eyes and mouth had some wrinkles which weren't too distinct. He had a ruddy complexion and a masculine bearing. It was obvious that he was a butler who could accompany his master hunting or even fend off enemies. After exchanging greetings, Klein invited him in to take a seat while smiling. He went directly to the point. Forgive me for being honest. I don't understand why you would become the butler of Baron Sindras. Your father was the assistant butler to the Negan family, and your grandfather was the land steward of the same family. Many of your ancestors served the Duke and his relatives until they returned to the arms of God. You should have had such a life trajectory as well. Due to Emperor Rosel's influence, the various countries in the northern continent went from using their fief and aristocratic title to indicate their nobility to just their names and aristocratic titles. Only under special formal occasions would they use the former. Of course, there were a few nobles whose names stemmed from their fiefs. Rebecca gave a standard smile and answered, Baron Sindras is a newly promoted noble, an old friend of the late Duke. Therefore, I was sent to his family to help him and his family get accustomed to noble life and grasp the corresponding etiquettes. The late Duke he was talking about was the present Duke Negan's father, the Palace Negan who had been assassinated the previous year. Then, why did you leave the Baron's family later? Klein deliberated and asked. Reback answered honestly, although Baron Cinders obtained his aristocratic title via the Conservative Party, he is one of the most famous bankers, investors, and enterprise owners in the kingdom. He was one of the earliest multimillionaires, and he had a strong penchant for the new party. He was willing to provide a certain degree of support to them, creating friction between him and the Conservative Party nobles, including the younger Duke. Therefore, to prevent the Baron from being put in a difficult position, I offered to leave. He actually tried to keep me, and he was an excellent employer. Klein nodded and asked, You believe in the Lord of Storms? Reback seriously replied, Yes, the Lord gives us courage, zeal, and a sense of responsibility. Klein asked a few more matters about butlers and received a detailed response. Then, he said with a smile, Might I trouble you to invite Mr. Walter who's at the coffee house up? After I'm done chatting with him, I'll make the decision. You can wait in the coffee house for about 10 minutes. All right. Reback didn't harp on the matter and immediately got up to bow. After bidding farewell, he left in a manner that exuded the air of a military man. As he watched him leave and close the door, Klein sat back down, picked up his black tea, and took a sip. He muttered silently, If I were to choose him, I'll likely establish certain connections with the present Duke Negan and the Conservative Party. The additional development might include the situation before the assassination. Before long, Walter arrived and entered after knocking on the door. Klein first exchanged some pleasantries before asking, What conflict did you have with Viscount Conrad's butler? You should understand that I need to understand the situation. I cannot afford to risk offending a noble. Walter had a broad forehead with raven black hair and brown stern eyes, but he wasn't a person who appeared taciturn. He thought for a few seconds and said, As a butler assistant, I was responsible for the Viscount's children. During this process, due to certain matters, I was appreciated by a particular important figure. As such, I won the recognition of the Viscount, which made the butler wary against me. Later, that important figure passed away due to an accident, and as a result, the Viscount's attitude towards me changed. The butler treated me even worse, making me believe that it was pointless waiting for things to improve. In charge of the Viscount's children, and he got to know an important figure. Talem also got to know Prince Edisac from teaching Viscount Conrad's youngest son. And the prince passed away a few months ago because of the great smog of Backlund. This matches Walter's explanation. From the looks of it, this butler was one of the peripheral victims of that matter. He's rather cautious and professional. He didn't expose his former employer's negatives or reveal the matter about the prince, nor did he speak ill of the Viscount's butler. If I select him, the additional development is something to look forward to. Klein listened silently as he made some connections. He then switched to asking some professional questions, expressing his desire to enter high society. After receiving a satisfactory answer, he straightened his clothes, got up and smiled. Let me introduce myself again. I'll be your employer, Dwayne Dantes. Walter immediately bowed and said, Sir, how may I be of service? He kept maintaining a stern, old-fashioned, and unperturbed demeanor, as though these were the professional traits of a butler. 2 matters, Klein replied with a chuckle. First, help me hand this bottle of white wine to Mr. Reback who's waiting at the coffee house. Please express my apologies and gratitude to him. Second, hire a solicitor to write up a professional contract that will include you and the other servants. All right, sir. Walter bowed once again. As Klein handed the white wine over, he asked, Walter, how many servants do you think I need to hire in order to not appear improper? While Walter received the bottle of Garrod white wine, he replied without any hesitation, You should first determine where you will be living. Only then can you know how many servants you actually need. Oh, do you have suggestions? My requirements are simple. I wish to live in Northborough, as I'm a pious believer of the goddess. Klein drew the crimson moon on his chest in passing. According to the information I read on the papers and magazines, a garden villa in a high-end district has to be at least £3 a week. That makes it £156 a year. Although there are no direct numbers, I can infer that the suburb's best garden villas cost about £2 a week. A high-end apartment with a few rooms and halls would cost about the same. It's been mentioned that that's relatively extravagant, a place where only the richest of the middle class can afford to rent. Yes, from that, I can preliminary estimate the rent of a tycoon's house. It's expensive just thinking about it. Back in Tianjin, Benson, Melissa, and I spent 13 solely a week on a gardenless terrace house. There was an additional 5 pence for the use of furniture. In the house I lived in Minsk Street, it didn't even reach £1. Sigh, so be it, even if it's £3. I have £2,888. It shouldn't be a problem renting a slightly better one. No problem at all. While awaiting Walter's answer, Klein silently recalled the information regarding rental costs. He began calculating how much he needed to pay every week and every year. Walter considered it for 2 seconds before replying in a serious manner, "Sir, you can choose 32 Buckland Street. It's close to St. Samuel Cathedral, and it's a 3-story manor with more than 10 rooms. It comes with a stable, a servant's quarters, and a rather large garden. Living nearby are baronets, House of Commons members of Parliament, and senior lawyers. The interior design is especially tasteful. There are plenty of famous paintings and antiques. All the furniture and wares are enough to accentuate your identity. You can rent it for a year first. If you find it satisfactory, you can consider buying it entirely." "Sounds pretty good." Klein asked with a smile, "How much is it to rent for a year?" Walter sternly and skillfully reported the number, including the use of furniture, £1,260 a year. Klein was glad that he wasn't drinking any tea, or else he would have spewed it all across his butler's face. He mustered nearly all of a clown's control in order to prevent any abnormalities from showing on his face. Author's note: the rental prices of houses are referenced from Money in the Past on the Economic Life of People in Beijing, Paris, and London in the 19th century and British Study of Victorian middle-class marriage and family life. A house costing £1,260 is an embassy rented during the Qing dynasty. As for whether there was a premium to it, I've no idea. After a brief moment of silence, Klein raised the black tea and took a sip. He said with a smile, "It's something that can be considered, but Emperor Roselle once said to never be in a rush to make a decision. Only after repeated comparison will one receive the best answer." "Are there any other options?" Walter, who wore a white glove, replied without any abnormality to his expression, "Phelps Street would also satisfy your request. I recall that Unit 9 is available for rent. It's a 2-story villa with more than 10 rooms. It comes with a stable, the servants' quarters, and a small garden. The furniture and wares are relatively old, but they're considered decent. The annual rent is £220. That's quite a reasonable price." "Reasonable. However, Phelps Street means that it's less than 100 meters away from St. Samuel Cathedral. Although this does help in being right under their noses, many of the pedestrians will be nighthawks. It would be very inconvenient for me to leave and return, making it easy to make mistakes." Klein, who originally had a budget of about £160, suddenly felt £220 was a pretty good price after undergoing the catharsis of the Garden Manor's price. This made him suspect whether Butler Walter had deliberately offered him an expensive choice at the very beginning. Klein pondered for a few seconds and said, "Any others?" Walter replied without showing any signs of impatience, 160 Buckland Street is also available for rent. It's a 3-story house which also comes with a garden, a stable, servants' quarters. There are more than 10 rooms, but its location isn't as good as Unit 32. The decorations, furniture, and wares can be considered decent. It has an annual rent of £315. £315. The rental fee flashed past Klein's slightly numb mind. He asked in thought, "What do you suggest?" At that moment, he had already decided on an answer, but as an employer, he wasn't in a rush to express his decision. This was because he would easily be belittled if his decision had a slip-up in common knowledge. Walter seriously thought and said, 160 Buckland Street. In comparison, the neighbors here will be more helpful in entering high society. As for Unit 32, it's overly extravagant. To rent it immediately will make your surrounding neighbors believe that you lack the necessary self-restraint, making it seem inappropriate. To put it simply, to rent a house costing £1,260 a year so easily will make neighbors define me as an ostentatious nouveau riche. To a tycoon who's trying to enter high society, such a reputation will be terrible. Klein sipped his black tea and asked with a smile, then, why did you offer me the selection of 32 Buckland Street? Walter unhurriedly bowed and said, Honorable sir, I'm only a butler. My responsibility isn't to decide, but to present all suitable options and give you certain suggestions for your consideration. In a situation where I'm unaware of your exact preferences, I have to do my best to provide you with all possible options. Very professional. He's likely worried that Dwayne Dantes is a nouveau riche who enjoys flaunting his wealth, so he first gave the choice of 32 Buckland Street as a way to probe me, so as to adjust his suggestions and management style. Klein smiled and said, let's eliminate Unit 32. We shall choose one of the two. Before I make the decision, I'm accustomed to paying a visit. Let's head off after lunch. Yes, sir. Walter continued wearing that stern, old-fashioned expression. South of the bridge, Harvest Church. Emlyn White was wiping the silver candle stands as he was mulling over the clues provided by Miss Magician. A secret beyonder gathering. That's equivalent to providing no clues. It will be rather difficult to pursue the matter. And I won't be able to participate in the gathering in short notice. Emlyn observed himself in the silver stand surface as he combed his hair. Then, he put down the wiping cloth, retreated to the first pew in the cathedral, and sat down as he watched Bishop Utravsky praying seriously before the altar with his gaze unfocused. Thoughts came to his mind as they occasionally created sparks. Emlyn suddenly grasped a detail. Why would a puppet that garners the primordial moon believers' immense interest happen to appear? Moon puppet. This feels like it's bait. See, could it be a trap designed by Russ Bathory and the others? Emlyn's eyes lit up as he suddenly stood up. Russ Bathory was a sanguine baron who was participating in the hunting competition. He was viewed by Emlyn as his strongest competitor. The more Emlyn thought about it, the more he found it as a possibility. This was because he knew that Bathory was an antique enthusiast, one who especially enjoyed collecting all sorts of strange trinkets from the southern continent. After pacing back and forth a few times, he curled the corners of his lips and chuckled. He silently said, I have no way of entering the Beyonder gathering to seek out the location of Windsor, but I can monitor Russ Bathory and finish off the target before he does. Haha, I look forward to his expression when that happens. Yes, Miss Magician's clue is indeed worth £100. Just as Emlyn was feeling abnormally excited, Father Utravsky ended his prayers, walked over, and looked down at him. He said with a gentle voice, Our piousness is not in our language, but in every detail of our body language. You were not being focused enough today. Wipe the candle stand again. All right, Emlyn replied, suddenly feeling ashamed. After the priest turned to walk to the confessional, he snapped to his senses as he muttered, amused and incensed, I'm not pious at all. I don't have to appear pious. Rows of straight intis parasol trees lined both ends of the street, making the streets appear beautiful and tranquil. With his golden-laid cane in hand, Klein slowly walked out of Unit 160. He silently drew a breath and turned to look at Walter. Tell the owner that I'm very satisfied. I'll temporarily rent it for a year. We might move to a better place later, such as Empress Borough. His words hinted at his ambition to obtain an aristocratic title, as Empress Borough was a place where the nobles gathered. As for why he didn't rent half a year to save on money, it was because such high-end estates only accepted long-term contracts. 1 year was the minimum. To be frank, if money wasn't an issue, Klein had quite a liking for the house. Its lawn was clean, and the garden was beautiful. The furnishing was befitting, and the wares were exquisite. There were plenty of bedrooms, sufficient furniture, and many washrooms on every floor. Even the stables and servants' quarters at the back weren't shoddy work. It was the best residence Klein could have ever imagined in the past. Walter immediately replied, "I'll hire a solicitor in a while." "Sir, what specific requests do you have regarding servants?" Klein strolled underneath the Intis parasol trees and smiled. "I'd first like to hear your suggestions." Walter thought for a moment before saying, "Sir, you will need a housekeeper regardless." During the interview, Klein had mentioned that Dwayne Dantes wasn't married and had no children, nor did he have any mistresses in Backland, therefore, he didn't need a lady's maid. Dwayne Dantes nodded gently without expressing any intentions. Walter continued, "Her duties would be to manage the female servants and the expenses of the household." "Sir, you can't leave everything to me or the same person. Balance is an art in politics, and it's also a good method when managing a household. Emperor Roselle once said that absolute power definitely corrupts. I'm confident in myself before money, but it's only confidence." Very honest. "A housekeeper is needed. She'll cost about £30 to £40 a year." Klein nodded. "Okay." At that moment, Walter was walking behind Klein to his side. He extended his hand to stop a rental carriage. On the carriage, he continued, "I will get the Family Servant Assistants Association to produce a name list for the selection of the housekeeper. You shall choose her personally, and I won't provide any suggestions. Based on the current residential situation, you will also need a steward who can be male or female. You will need a valet, a lady's maid in charge of the bedrooms, and 2 chambermaids who will be in charge of the living room and activity room. 2 footmen to valet guests, a parlor maid, a scullery maid, 2 laundresses, and 2 handymen. Apart from those, you will need a cook, 2 gardeners, 2 coachmen or 1 coachman and an assistant coachman. If necessary, you can have an additional attendant, a steward's boy, a nursery governess, and a second cook. You currently do not have any carriages, but you'll definitely have 2 in the future. A 4-wheeled carriage costs about £300. A 2-wheeled one costs about £100. As he listened to his butler introduce the required servants in detail, Klein's mind went numb. He didn't wish to do the accounts on how much he needed to spend. After all, it was paid on a weekly or monthly basis, and not an annual basis. Ignoring the attendant, steward's boy, nursery governess, and second cook, there will be 10 to 11 male servants, and the female servants with the housekeeper will number about 9 to 10. It's basically several times what I calculated. Each week's expenses will exceed £10. This can only be determined after all of them are hired and their salaries are negotiated. There's also the carriage. Klein's mind couldn't help but drift when he saw Walter's mouth moving non-stop. Seeing the staid and extremely dignified Mr. Dwayne Dantes nodding from time to time, Walter subconsciously broadened the topic. In the future, you will also need to rent a manor in the suburbs to entertain friends to have a wonderful weekend over there. There's no rush. It can wait until you hold several dances and banquets at Unit 160. Sir, do not mention housemaids in front of the neighbors of this street. Only those with salaries below £500 a year will hire housemaids because they're unable to hire enough female servants to handle the different parts of the household. Klein listened numbly as he reflexively wore a warm smile. Back at the hotel, he watched Walter leave before he sat back down, his expression collapsing. When it was 20 minutes to 3, Klein rubbed his temples and slowly got up. He went into his bedroom and prepared to begin this week's tarot gathering. Above the grey fog, in the palace with the towering dome. The fool Klein glanced at the sun, who had been pulled up ahead of time, as well as the world who had been conjured in advance. Emanating a little bit of his spirituality, he made contact with the crimson star representing justice, the hanged man, the magician, the moon, and the hermit. Beams of light rose up as relatively blurry figures appeared on the 2 sides of the long bronze table. Justice Audrey, who had just returned from a tree farm leading to the castle, had already changed into a dress. Her sleeves were layered in laces that were filled with lustrous pearls. Like clockwork, she stood up, lifting the corners of her skirt as she curtsied. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Klein instantly felt better as he nodded with a smile in response. Meanwhile, he couldn't help but sigh. To act like a tycoon costs so much money. I wonder how huge the expenditures are for a noble like Miss Justice. After all the members exchanged greeting nods, he looked at the hermit, as he knew that this pirate admiral would likely provide him with new Roselle diary entries. As he had expected, Catlia spoke out. Mr. Fool, I only managed to find one page of Roselle's diary. Just one page? Shouldn't Queen Mystic be able to produce an entire book anytime she wants? Klein, who had been met with repeated tribulations recently, remained composed as he nodded. That won't be a problem. Catlia immediately conjured a yellowish-brown diary page. It then seemed to tear through the spirit world and enter Mr. Fool's hands. Klein deliberately looked down, and he was surprised to discover that the beginning of the diary entry didn't have a date. That means that it's a second page from another diary page. Why didn't Bernadette give me the first page? She should be able to figure out dates. After all, old Neil succeeded. Did she not? Or were the diary pages thrown into a mess, and she wasn't able to restore them to the correct order? Does this mean that Emperor Roselle's belongings were vied for by various factions after his death? Some were lost, and at that time, Bernadette was unable to stop them. Only when she became Queen Mystic did she have the ability to get involved. As Klein guessed, he quickly began reading the content on the piece of paper. How surprising. The fourth epic history divulged by Mr. Dorr is getting more and more interesting. This unlucky B***starred who's trapped amidst the storm and lost to the depths of darkness told me that the Black Emperor died once and had revived again. Surprisingly, this matches what was said in that ancient secret organization. Back during that gathering, they said that the 9 secret mausoleums of the Black Emperor weren't all destroyed. Even if this deity who walked the land were to perish, he could resurrect. Even if all 9 mausoleums were destroyed, as long as the order left behind by the Black Emperor remained, he had the ability to strangely resurrect. Only with the birth of a new Black Emperor would he be completely obliterated, never to appear again. According to Mr. Dorr's description, the Black Emperor had 3 stages in the process of his resurrection. First is that the uniqueness leaves the person possessing it, turning into an abstract concept. Second is when the subjects of the Black Emperor hear his mighty voice again. The third is that, when fused with the uniqueness, the Black Emperor would reappear in the astral world. The 3 sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics would automatically be returned into the Emperor's hands. This is an order that other true deities are unable to distort or prevent. This way, the sequence 1 Prince of Disorder of this pathway, Blood Emperor, and Night Emperor would be in a rather awkward situation. They might instantly perish, falling back to sequence 2. Mr. Dorr said that back then, the Lord of Storms and the Evernight Goddess had chosen the Night Emperor. They helped him switch to a neighboring pathway, the Judgment Pathway. As such, the Tudor-Trunsoist United Empire fractured. And Blood Emperor Alista Tudor, who was pushed into a corner, made a crazy decision. It was to switch to a non-neighboring Beyonder pathway. He paid the cost of losing his reasoning, becoming a lunatic so as to forcefully advance and become a true god. I have to say that this decision is filled with irrationality. It's almost impossible for it to happen, but Mr. Dorr told me that Alista Tudor eventually succeeded. The craziest true god was born. It's truly fascinating, but Mr. Dorr didn't go into the details since he kept it from me. I asked him which was worse, lunacy or death. He said that it was an obvious choice, death, because as long as one was alive, it wasn't impossible to recover even if one was completely mad. He laughed and gave an example. A crazy true god could use his instinct to mate with all kinds of living beings, giving birth to all kinds of descendants. Through this process, if he was lucky enough, the conflicting Beyonder characteristics would be purged. The lunacy would slowly disappear with time as he improves bit by bit. Mr. Dorr deliberately didn't say if there would be any remnant problems, nor did he explain why almost no one made such a choice, but I could tell that there was definitely some huge hidden risks. I have to say, Mr. Dorr's understanding of true gods far exceeds my imagination. Before he was exiled, he might have made an attempt to reach sequence 0. It's no wonder he shows such contempt to Zeradal, and he has zero respect for the various true gods. This only makes me more unwilling to let him return to the real world. There's plenty of information. It's no wonder that Bernadette deliberately chose this diary page. Wait, why did she choose this page? What important meaning is there behind it? Did problems begin to slowly happen to Emperor Roselle from that day until he eventually went mad? Mad? Could it be? No way. Roselle's situation back then was similar to Blood Emperor Alista Tudor. His pathway was severed, and the neighboring pathways were blocked by either people or items, making it difficult to reach them. Could it be that under the immense stress, he made an irrational choice like Blood Emperor, and he had attempted to switch to a non-neighboring pathway? This way, the craziness in his later years was a result of him truly losing his reasoning, not a result of the defamation from others. It's no wonder Bernadette hated and betrayed him but is also trying to figure out the truth. From this angle, certain things have become very interesting. Roselle forcefully ascended to the throne and declared himself emperor, his declaration of the civil code, using the order from Earth's 18th and 19th century to replace the existing order. He wantonly spread his speeches and promoted his sense of aesthetics. Haha, I really belittled this senior of mine. I always thought he was cosplaying Napoleon or Caesar for his own entertainment. So it was him making preparations to become the Black Emperor. No, I saw a few pages of his diary back then. His thought processes were clear, and his emotions were stable. He could even communicate with various noblewomen of different ages. He might not have made the final decision back then but was subconsciously leaving a way out for himself. The civil code probably wasn't deliberate. As a usurper to the throne, declaring new laws is necessary, and from what he could use for reference, the civil code was what matched the situation and flow of history. The actions of him declaring himself emperor later on must be something Bernadette found incomprehensible. She found it difficult to accept. As Roselle's most beloved child, she probably noticed certain abnormalities with her father before he declared himself king. Hence, she chose the longest diary page during that period of the emperor's life to give to Admiral of Stars. Klein couldn't help but make connections, as though the heavy history hidden deep in the fog was being turned over to reveal a page filled with blood and iron. This made him curious about the final trigger that made Roselle go mad. Meanwhile, he also resolved some of his puzzlement. So the resurrection of the Black Emperor is done this way. It's very similar to my previous guess. In the fourth epoch, there was actually a Tudor-Trunsoist united empire which was supported by the 6 deities like the Lord of Storms and the Evernight Goddess. The 2 thrones in the ruins in William Street can be explained then, as it belonged to the United Empire. According to Mr. Dorr, the 6 deities chose the Night Emperor, resulting in the United Empire fracturing. Then, who helped the Blood Emperor capture or kill the 3 Sequence 1 hunters? Among them, Red Angel Medici was likely stronger than the Blood Emperor from back then. Primordial Demonis? Death? Primordial Moon? Dark Side of the Universe? Mother Tree of Desire? Klein tried listing possibilities for his guesses, but he had nowhere to begin. He quickly made the diary disappear as he smiled at the hermit. What's your request? Catlia frankly answered without holding back. Is there someone else apart from Emperor Roselle mentioned in this diary entry? This question made Audrey turn to look at Mr. Fool. Her eyes sparkled as they were filled with curiosity. Even her ears seemed to prick up. Alger was also very interested in the matter. That person definitely wouldn't be an ordinary person to be mentioned in Emperor Roselle's diary. Klein could guess at their thoughts as he couldn't help but lampoon inwardly. It's only because this diary entry was specially selected by Bernadette. If it were any other entries, I'd have to tell you that the other people mentioned are Demonis A, Demonis B, Hunter A, Hunter B, some aristocratic ma'am, some aristocratic lady. After 2 seconds of consideration, Klein, who was leisurely leaning back into his chair, replied with a smile, Mr. Dorr. Mr. Dorr. To be addressed by Mr. Fool in such a manner, it must be an existence that's close to a god, right? Audrey figured out Mr. Dorr's status from the tone and words used as she obtained an affirmative answer. Catlia and company also had similar ideas, but no one knew who Mr. Dorr was. They looked at each other only to be met with the shaking of heads. Seeing Furs and the other members have a uniform reaction, Klein deliberately looked at the lady and chuckled. You shouldn't be a stranger towards him. Ah? Furs wore a confounded look. She didn't feel like she knew a so-called Mr. Dorr. This person seemed to be of a very high level. I'm no stranger to Mr. Dorr? Apart from Mr. Fool, the only one I'm no stranger to will be the 7 deities. Furthermore, I've only been to the cathedral of the god of steam and machinery. As Furs was feeling puzzled, she quickly recalled which high-level existence she could have made contact with. Since there weren't many, she quickly eliminated all the other possibilities. Her eyes lit up as she made the connection with the contents of what Mr. Fool had originally said to her. She looked at the end of the bronze table that was enveloped in gray fog. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Is he the one who created those ravings during the full moon?" Klein chuckled with a nod. That's right. Ravings during the full moon. What's that? Audrey and company exchanged looks as though they were ordinary people who had just entered the mysterious world. They had never heard of any so-called full moon ravings. As expected, Miss Magician isn't simple. She actually knows about Mr. Dorr, and she's aware of the corresponding matters. My initial judgment wasn't wrong. Although the beyonder ingredients she needs are relatively low, there are too many possibilities. Catlia nodded her head indiscernibly, planning to ask more about Mr. Dorr during the free exchange. She was also willing to pay a certain price for it. An existence who could be seriously mentioned by Emperor Roselle and addressed by Mr. Fool in a rather formal manner, had to have many secrets involved. It was definitely nothing simple. At that moment, Fur silently exhaled. She felt that she was one step closer to removing her curse. At the very least, I now know who's producing the full moon ravings. She lowered her gaze and sincerely said to Mr. Fool, "Thank you for your reminder." Klein didn't speak further, nor did he point out that Mr. Dorr was suspected to be the ancestor of the Abraham family, Bethel. After surveying around the table, he said with a casual tone, "You may begin." With that said, he immediately controlled the world to say with a hoarse voice, "I have 2 mystical items for sale." 2 mystical items. Mr. World has recently been able to produce something of great value at every gathering. He lives up to being Mr. Fool's blessed. Audrey poignantly sighed in amazement as she cast her eyes towards the other end of the long bronze table. Clearly, she was looking forward to the world's explanation of the powers of the item. Alger was tempted, as he knew that the mystical items the world sold were definitely up to mark. However, thinking back to his lack of savings, with the secret to the primitive island already given to him, all he could do was silently sigh, feeling depressed. He still had 5 hours before arriving at Pasu Island, and he was yearning to immediately fly over and complete his report. Then, he could leave the area, find an Obninsk to advance to Ocean Songster. Once he did that, he could explore that primitive island with the world, obtaining the relevant rewards, so as to ease his financial situation. As for Derek, Emlyn, and Furs, although they were somewhat curious about the mystical item, they lacked the desire to actually purchase it. One of them could submit an application to the 6-member council to select one mystical item which the City of Silver had for becoming a Sequence 6. The other wished to receive the rewards from the hunting competition, and he wasn't certain what the rewards would be, therefore, blindly purchasing items made it easy for redundancy and wastage to happen. Furthermore, he only had the 2,000 to 3,000 pounds needed for the reward for clues. As for the last one, she didn't even have the money to purchase it. Catlia looked at Gehrman Sparrow with piqued interest as she considered the possible origins of the mystical item. If it was suitable, without clashing with the 2 mystical items she had, she didn't mind buying it. Seeing how the 2 major clients appeared interested, the world gave a deep chortle. One of them is Scales of Luck. It's what I named it. As he spoke, he requested Mr. Fool to conjure the silver necklace that had an ancient coin dangling from it. After introducing its mystical effects and negative effects, He glanced at Audrey and specially gave a warning. I suggest that beyonders lacking in combat strength don't purchase it. Although it can allow one to avoid a fatal blow, the subsequent backlash is equally dangerous. One needs to have sufficient combat strength and sharp reactions to have a chance of surviving the backlash. Thinking back to how she took on more of a support role, one that leaned towards control and influence, as well as her lack of combat experience, Audrey nodded with slight disappointment. It was an indication that Mr. World was right. Mr. World is pretty nice to me and the Tarot Club members. He's willing to give such a warning. This would have prevented him from selling it. Audrey adjusted her understanding of the world. The hermit found the description extremely familiar. She had apparently heard of the effects of the scales of luck. Scenes quickly flashed through her mind before finally being fixed onto a few particular scenes. Catlia's eyes constricted as she blurted out in surprise, "Senor? It's likely Admiral of Blood Senor's necklace. It looks similar, and the effects are identical. Where did Gehrman Sparrow obtain it? What did he do this time? Did I miss some important news over the past few days while the future was out at sea?" Catlia instinctively suspected that the world had stirred up something massive again. Klein thought about it and controlled the world to laugh deeply. He's already dead. He wasn't against letting Miss Justice and company realize that Gehrman Sparrow was equivalent to the world. After all, there were already two people who knew, and he didn't plan on using this identity frequently in the future. A powerful member who often took action made the rest of the Tarot Club feel a greater sense of belonging. He's already dead. Gehrman Senor killed Senor? In the previous battle, I only held a slight advantage over him. Catlia discovered that she was increasingly unsure of the world's strength. Although Admiral of Blood's bounty was higher than hers, it was mainly because he did more evil deeds. In terms of her strength and mystical items, Catlia was slightly stronger. It wasn't as if she had never had any conflict with Senor. She had held the advantage several times, but she had failed to mortally wound him. As for Gehrman Sparrow, she believed that he was inferior to her when they met on the future. He was even unlikely to defeat Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy in her optimum state. Only when this crazy adventurer completed his advancement and hunted Slaughterer Curtius did she determine that he truly had the strength of a pirate admiral and was someone at her level. However, a week had just passed, and Gehrman Sparrow had completed another hunt. He had finished off Admiral of Blood Senor, who was one of the top 3 pirate admirals. Catlia knew that she herself was incapable of doing so. He's dead? Admiral of Blood Senor is dead? Gehrman Sparrow did it? He's killing one sequence 5 a week? Furthermore, each one of them is stronger than the last. Even if he's Mr. Fool's blessed, isn't such strength too ridiculous? Especially when he hasn't become a demigod. Was it done with the help of the other blessed? The church should have the relevant records, but at my present position, I won't be able to read them. Alger was secretly alarmed as he automatically began to consider a reasonable explanation. Audrey was still in her family castle in Eastchester County. All she read was a few newspapers and magazines that involved the entire nation, so she wasn't aware of what happened at sea. However, from Ma'am Hermit's tone and words, she could tell that Mr. World had done something incredible again. Senor. Mr. Hanged Man had apparently mentioned it before. It's Admiral of Blood's name. Mr. World finished off this pirate admiral and obtained his mystical item? How amazing. That's practically what I dreamt of. Back when I had heard of the 7 pirate admirals, I had imagined myself becoming a powerful beyonder to adventure out into the sea to capture all of them and hand them over to the kingdom. So our Tarot Club is already this powerful. I have to investigate who killed Admiral of Blood. That way, I'll be able to figure out Mr. World's real identity. But would he be unhappy about that? No, he mentioned it himself, so he's likely willing to let himself be known. Audrey thought in glee. Furs, who needed to read various newspapers to obtain material, instantly recalled a piece of news that she had recently read. Admiral of Blood Senor was suspected to have been killed by the crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow. See, could it be that Mr. World is the crazy adventurer Worth? No, is the crazy adventurer with a bounty of £50,000. Furs felt respect. She began to believe that he had the ability to help her finish off the Aurora Order Oracle, the suspected traveler, Louis Veen. Emlyn shared similar feelings as Audrey. This was because he seldom read minor newspapers. His area of activity didn't include any information-gathering grounds. As for Derek, he wasn't one bit surprised. He had long confirmed that Mr. World was extremely powerful. Even though Mr. Hanged Man had once mentioned that Admiral of Blood Senior was very powerful, he believed that Senior was inferior to Mr. World due to a lack of any direct impression of him. Catleya said after a few seconds of silence, "How much do you plan on selling it for, or what item would you like to trade it with? If the price is suitable, I can consider it." "Great. There's finally someone who's interested." Klein, who was burdened with immense financial pressure, controlled the world to say, 12,000 gold pounds. He was afraid Catleya would be frightened away by such a price, so he quickly added, "You can choose to pay a portion with gold coins. That way, all you will need is 11,000 pounds. Klein believed that Admiral of Stars, who had plundered gold-carrying ships from various nations, definitely had some gold reserves. Even if she didn't have much, she could exchange for them from other pirates. This would allow him to make his first payment to Miss Messenger. As for fishing up sunken ships, due to the existence of the Church of Storms, Klein believed that any easily discoverable ships would have long been found by the irascible Storm Bros. Sea King isn't weaker than Sea God, and there had to be a handful of people at the level of Sea King inside the Church of Storms. Catleya did a silent calculation and said, 4,000 pounds worth of gold coins and 6,500 pounds in cash. We can close the deal if you are agreeable. The money wasn't easy to raise even for her, but she had the Moses ascetic order backing her. Spending about 10,000 pounds to obtain the Scales of Luck was something that no secret organization would object to. As expected of a pirate admiral. Unfortunately, I have to avoid the Rose school of thought, and I can't clean out Admiral of Blood's ship. Klein made the world carefully consider it before saying, "Deal." Finally. At the instant that they reached a deal, Klein heaved a sigh of relief. He felt the pressure on him significantly decrease. Although Miss Messenger had said that the 10,000 lone gold coins could be paid in installments, and she hadn't specified when it would begin, Klein didn't wish to drag out payment for too long, afraid that he would incur the wrath of Rionette Tinker. After all, she was a spirit world creature at the demigod level. If she really ended up mad, she had the means to make things difficult for her employer even if she was restricted by the contract. Besides, the cost of acting as a tycoon is just too high. The salary of 20+ servants and the corresponding costs is only just a tiny portion. There's still the carriage, horses, wine, gifts for neighbors, banquets, and investments to conceal my status, each of them more expensive than the last. If I don't save up enough cash, I'm afraid I'll go bankrupt and be unable to continue. Sigh, 6,500 pounds with the cash I already have should be able to last until I confirm my target, right? No, the experiences from the past 2 days have proven to me that I should never use my own understanding to imagine a tycoon's life. I probably still need another 5,000 to 6,000 pounds to barely maintain it. Klein wished to raise his hand to rub his temples, but he ultimately held back. He soothed his mind and made the world look around again before saying with a hoarse laugh, "The second item is biological poison bottle." He used a relatively succinct description to describe the conjured brownish translucent bottle. He emphasized the few poisonous traits it had, how long it took, how to prevent the effects ahead of time, and any negative effects it gave while carrying it. Audrey felt a chill down her spine as she felt a little embarrassed. She felt the former because of the terrifying poison that made one rip off their skin and flesh, while the latter was a result of the strange aphrodisiac effects it had on a wide area. This is truly a crazy mystical item. It's the type that needs to be prepared ahead of time to show its full effects. It's quite useless against an ordinary spectator because observation and reading minds can help the low-sequence beyonders of this pathway detect the danger ahead of time and make the necessary actions. However, there's no need for me to do so. If I were to detect danger ahead of time, I can directly cry out for my guards. Besides, I don't like such effects. It will easily harm myself. Audrey, you're already a mature and rational beyonder. You can't buy everything you see. Audrey seriously considered it for a few seconds before giving up on asking the price. Seeing Miss Justice not ask for the price, Klein couldn't help but let the world add, £5,200. Audrey bit down on her inner lips as she politely shook her head. I wish to obtain a mystical item that's more offensive in nature. Spectator was a pathway that lacked any direct attacks in the early stages, one that was only effective at affecting or controlling their targets. £5,200. Alger, Furs, and Emlyn repeated the price softly in unison before they shirked all thoughts about it. £5,200. Catlia suddenly seemed to recall something as she paused obviously. She then quickly added, it's not necessary for me. Ma'am Hermit seems to be afraid of something. Audrey acutely read her emotions. For a split second, Catlia felt that the biological poison bottle had a lot of synergy with poison expert Frank Lee. Furthermore, their powers didn't overlap too significantly, and they even complemented one another. She was wondering if she should purchase it for her first mate since he had saved up quite a bit of money, but considering how Frank Lee might come up with terrifying experiments after obtaining the biological poison bottle, she trembled and gave up on the idea. She didn't wish to see the deck of the future produce the children of the crew, the kind that mood. After the gathering is over, I'll write to Miss Sharon and tell her that Admiral of Blood's necklace has been sold. All that's left is the biological poison bottle. Klein hid his disappointment, and after some thought, made the world speak. I have a book of secrets. It's a book on mysticism left behind by the southern continent's shaman King Klarman. It's suitable for mid-sequence beyonders who have pretty good foundations. The price is £1,000. Knowledge is money. Having undergone the teachings of Mr. Fool, Mr. Hanged Man and the other members of the psychology alchemists, Audrey was tempted. She now had an extremely solid foundation in mysticism, and she had a desire to improve further. The psychology alchemists will likely teach me some mysticism knowledge of a higher level in the future, but it will definitely not be all-encompassing and will be limited to the domain of the mind. Audrey easily convinced herself as she nodded. This is exactly what I want. Furs was equally interested, but the thought of how much money she had made her close her mouth. As for the other members, they didn't lack such knowledge. As expected of Miss Justice. She doesn't bargain at all. My bottom line was actually £800. No, I don't have one at all. It's not like knowledge can only be sold once. Klein happily made the world chuckle. Deal. However, I have to remind you not to pray to the primordial moon. It will make you become a lump of squirming flesh that only knows to wildly mate with different creatures to produce all kinds of children. Of course, you cannot pray to other secret existences. It will be equally dangerous. Audrey was terrified by what she heard as she couldn't help but change her seating posture. She then calmed down, turning to look at the end of the long bronze table. She said firmly, I'll only pray to Mr. Fool when holding a secret ritual. She had spoken with utmost sincerity and without any hypocrisy. Miss Justice really worships and trusts the Fool. Klein felt touched and a little ashamed. This was because the sea god Scepter's domain didn't overlap with the primordial moon. He was unable to provide an effective response in certain rituals. All he could do was attempt to use some of the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog as feedback. Following that, as the Fool, he expressed his attitude on the matter. Very good. Meanwhile, having achieved his goal, he made the world say, I have an interrogator beyonder characteristic here for just £1,200. How many items does he have? Furs was dumbfounded. Considering how Zio was still lacking in money and lacked the corresponding formula, all she could do was retract her gaze and pretend as though she hadn't heard him. As for the interrogator beyonder characteristic which was in the hands of Mr. Fool's subordinate, she didn't believe that he would keep it that long for her. Seeing no one respond, the world coughed and said, I'm done. Just as he said that, Alger, who had been waiting all this time, looked at Catlia and said, I wish to know where Obninsk monsters that do not belong to the Church of Storms are. Obninsk monsters that don't belong to the Church of Storms? The Hanged Man really isn't a member of the Church of Storms? Katlia frowned a little before easing them. I'll help you ask. We'll talk about the price when I have actual clues. All right. Alger silently sighed. A few seconds prevailed before Emlyn said to Furs, I'll pay you the £100 for the clue today. Thank you, Furs said without a delightful expression. Mr. World's transactions were all in the thousands or more. It made her feel a little numb to such a pittance. Emlyn then looked towards Derek. The crystallized roots of the Tree of Elders and supplementary ingredients you need have been acquired. Hand me the list of resources and monsters around the City of Silver, and I'll choose a few items of equal value. Oh, they cost me a total of £2,000. Adding my payment of £200, it will be a total of £2,200. Emlyn only wished to obtain things that he could quickly sell, otherwise, he wouldn't have much money. All right. Thank you, Mr. Moon. Derek was delighted for he suddenly felt that Mr. Moon wasn't that irritating after all. He quickly conjured the corresponding list and handed it over to Emlyn. Emlyn casually flipped through the piece of paper and suddenly felt that it wasn't right. This was because just this piece of information had extremely high value. It presented the detailed information and corresponding resources around the City of Silver. I remember that they didn't pay to see this list. Emlyn couldn't help but glance at the Hanged Man Alger and the Hermit Katlia. At that instant, he seemed to understand something. When he looked at the sun again, Emlyn had a newfound sense of superiority, as well as a sense of guilt he couldn't get rid of. He cleared his throat and said, this, also this. Derek seriously memorized what was said, and he indicated that there was no need for him to return to the City of Silver, as those could be gathered around Afternoon Town. Following that, Audrey inquired about clues to the fruit of an illusory chime tree, but she received a disappointing answer. When the transactions came to an end, it didn't need the fool to announce it, as they automatically entered a free exchange. Alger looked towards Little Sun and said, Are you still in Afternoon Town? Yes, but we will be returning to the City of Silver soon. The new expedition team arrived today. Derek not only answered Mr. Hanged Man's question seriously, but he even offered a tidbit. I've already told the chief that while clearing out the Afternoon Town monsters, I obtained the potion formula for notary. The Hanged Man nodded slightly and said, What was his attitude? He only said very good. Derek carefully recalled what had happened. Alger chuckled when he heard that. You can be at ease. Your chief is very happy to see you grow. In contrast, he will be more wary of the Elder Council's shepherd. He didn't continue on the topic as he informed all the members of a piece of news. Recently, many pirates have been heading to Bansi Harbor. They discovered that it has already been completely destroyed. Even if it's rebuilt, it would take several years. After hearing the Hanged Man's description, Klein couldn't help but recall Red Angel Medici and the evil spirit found in the underground ruin. However, he didn't share the discoveries of his exploration this time. Firstly, there wasn't a need to, and secondly, it involved Miss Sharon. As for the other members, they had already learned that Bansi Harbor had been destroyed. And since the Hanged Man hadn't revealed any new information, there was no need for them to reply to the matter. Realizing that no one was saying anything, Alger glanced at the world before looking back. He said calmly, That's all from me. The hermit immediately turned to look at Furs. Ma'am, what do you know about Mr. Dorr? I can pay for the corresponding piece of information. Furs, who didn't wish to expose her problems, suddenly hesitated when she heard the latter half of the sentence. She was momentarily tempted. Payment. I wonder how much Ma'am Hermit can pay me. I don't really know much about Mr. Dorr either. Furthermore, some of the knowledge stems from Mr. Fool's words. Furs looked to the end of the long bronze table once again and asked, Honorable Mr. Fool, can I tell her? As he met her every full moon, Klein knew that Miss Magician's financial situation wasn't in the best of states, so he smiled with a nod. Yes. Furs silently heaved a sigh of relief, turned to Xianxia, and said, £500. You can request for a private exchange. Xianxia didn't bargain. After some thought, she said, there's no need. Just say it directly. She wished to see if the other members would be able to figure out more about Mr. Door from Miss Magician's description. Furs nodded and deliberated over her words. I once obtained a mystical item that helped me traverse the spirit world. But after using it, I would hear strange ravings every full moon or blood moon. It would inflict an excruciating pain upon me that puts me on the verge of losing control. And according to Mr. Fool, these ravings come from Mr. Door. She paused and added, he might be asking for help. So Furs has been silently suffering such pain. She usually doesn't show it, acting as though she greatly enjoys life. As Audrey subconsciously pitied her friend, she began wondering how she hadn't discovered anything abnormal about Furs with her spectator powers. Mystical item that can traverse the spirit world. Ravings during the full moon. Suspected to be asking for help. Xianxia repeated Miss Magician's key points as she nodded with satisfaction. Thank you for your description. She then swept her gaze at the other members, regretfully realizing that no one else had any additional reaction. The free exchange continued and soon came to an end. Watching the other members leave and helping them complete a few transactions, Klein returned to the real world as he sat in his reclining chair, feeling relaxed as he rested for a while. Following that, he walked to his desk, and he picked up a pen and paper to write to Sharon. He told her that the scales of luck had been sold, leaving only the biological poison bottle for sale, as well as the lunatic beyonder characteristic. After folding the letter, he wrote the information such as 126, Guard Street, Hillston, and Ma'am Miriam. Then, he opened his iron cigar case and made Admiral of Blood Senior silently appear beside him. This wraith acted like a valet as he humbly picked up the letter on the table before vanishing from the room. A few streets away, a letter appeared out of nowhere in a mailbox as it fell inside. East Chester County, the Hall family manor. Audrey looked at the mirror with her unfocused green eyes as the contents of the Book of Secrets filled her mind. This knowledge formed an illusory book that appeared upon being recalled. She could then flip to the corresponding page simply by willing it. This was a result of Klein directly using a portion of the powers from the mysterious space above the gray fog to create a product that was a fusion of information bestowment and the seer's dreamscape ability to recall it. It could last a week or two. And this was sufficient for Audrey to finish reading the Book of Secrets. If she had anything she couldn't recall in the future, she could always request for a bestowment. Mr. Fool's condition seems to be improving. Audrey thought in delight as a twinkle gradually returned to her eyes. She stood up, walked to the door, and said to the bored golden retriever who was sprawled on the ground outside, Susie, you don't look ladylike enough this way. Susie looked around warily and twitched her nose before saying, this is the most standard action during hound training. But you aren't a qualified hound. Audrey lampooned as she said with a smile, I thought you would reply, Audrey, I'm only a dog. Susie replied in a serious manner, an excessive use of repeated words makes it easy for others to grasp your personal habits and mental gymnastics. Audrey, that's what that book on psychology wrote. Audrey was momentarily at a loss for words. At that moment, she saw her father, Earl Hall, with his valet and attendant walking up the castle staircase. Even though it was sunny outside, this place remained dark and gloomy. There were even candle stands that had been lit. They were embedded in the walls as they illuminated the stairs. This castle is just too old. I think it needs a major renovation, Earl Hall casually grumbled to his daughter. Audrey nodded in a demure manner and said, yes, my dear Earl. This is precisely why I dislike this place. It makes me feel like I'm slowly rotting away. But I'm actually spending £13,000 a year to repair this place, Earl Hall said with a regretful chuckle. Audrey glanced at Susie and smiled at her father. Father, is there something for me? Earl Hall pointed at the papers in his attendant's hands. A telegram from Backlund. Someone is selling 10% of the Backlund Bike Company. Are you interested? I think this industry has a very bright future. And it's currently far from reaching its lowest estimated prospects. Bike? Audrey found the word rather unfamiliar as her eyes darted around, her expression slightly confused. Earl Hall smiled at his daughter. It's a kind of machinery with 2 wheels that allows a person to ride on it. You can understand it as a carriage for the ordinary person. In Loen and Backland, the majority of the population doesn't mostly comprise of the nobles or businessmen, but the ordinary people who engage in labor work. Next would be the type of people with some technical skill and standing. This is the target audience of the bike. They have absolute numbers, as well as the required ability to purchase it. Even if 10% of them are willing to buy a bike, it will lead to quite a wonderful development for this company. Yes, they hold the corresponding patents. Audrey trusted her father's foresight, and she could understand the prospects as described by him. She nodded gently and said, "How much would the 10% shares cost?" According to preliminary estimates, the Backland Bike Company is currently valued at £50,000. This is because the product's advertising and sales campaign still needs time to develop further. Therefore, you can't naively believe that the 10% shares are only worth £5,000. I suggest that you bid £8,000 in the first round of bidding, with a bottom-line price of £15,000. I will send people to help you in this matter, Earl Hall answered succinctly. About £10,000. I've mostly used up the cash for this month. Clearly a little embarrassed, Audrey said, "Father, I won't be able to produce that much money on such short notice. And selling my shares, estate, collections, or await their profits will require some time." Earl Hall laughed out loud. "There's no need to go through so much hassle. You can mortgage your shares in the Backland Munitions Corporation or Pritz Commercial Marine Company to the bank for a short period of time to obtain the cash. Once the matter is complete, you can mortgage the shares in the Backland Bike Company for a longer period of time, using the mortgage loan to pay off the first loan. This way, you'll only need to pay about a week to 2 weeks of relatively high interest to complete the trade. And the bike company's dividends a year would be enough to cover the interest of the long-term loan. You'll then be able to patiently wait for its value be recognized, and that's a high probability event." Although Audrey had never received a complete education in commercial finance, she wasn't too unfamiliar with such matters with a major banker as her father. Some thought had allowed her to understand the entire process as she asked as a form of confirmation, "That's to say, I only need to pay about £200 to £300 to obtain 10% of the bike company's shares?" "Or lower," Earl Hall said with a smile. Audrey understood her father. As the largest shareholder of the Varvat Bank, as well as the 4th largest shareholder of the Backland Bank, he had the ability to help his daughter to obtain the most reasonable interest for a short-term loan. "Thank you, my dear Earl." Audrey smiled as she curtsied. Under the moonlight, with the dark blue seawater nearing the color of black, Alger Wilson stood at the bow of the ship as he watched the silent outline of Possum Island. This was the headquarters of the Church of Storms, a land where a true God's grace was showered. As a middle-ranking member of the church, Alger recalled himself coming here only 3 times. The first was him finding the Blue Avenger and after advancing to Seafarer. The second was his report last year, and this time. And very long ago, as a mixed blood with dark blue hair, he had been selected to enter the headquarters to be a member of the children's choir, but without any talent in singing, he was soon dismissed. He returned to the chapel on the island where he was born to be a servant. And the priest there was an extremely violent superior to his subordinates. Every time he recalled that piece of history, his expression would turn extremely livid, fortifying his thirst to become a high-ranking member of the church. Amidst the wind, the Blue Avenger silently cruised forward into the harbor. In Backland, which had also ushered in the night, Emlyn White, who was dressed in a starched formal suit and top hat, infiltrated the residence of another sanguine baron, Russ Bathory. He believed that Russ would be taking action soon to reel in his bait. And for a sanguine, a night with the crimson moon was very suitable for hunting. After an unknown period of time, Emlyn's eyes suddenly lit up. He saw a figure leap from a window facing the house's rear before landing silently on the ground. Under the crimson but gloomy moonlight, Emlyn took out a metal bottle, twisted its lid, and downed it. Then, he seemed to transform into a shadow as he drifted over the surface of the wall, quickly and silently following Russ Bathory. Sanguine were always known for their speed. The two barons ran through the sides of the dark alleys and streets, one after another, spending more than half an hour to arrive at the messy and dirty East Borough, where they stopped in front of an old apartment. Seeing Russ Bathory choose to climb the pipe, and using the most stealthy approach to head for the third story, Emlyn slowed down his pace and didn't rush to follow behind him, as he would be easily discovered. After 2 seconds of serious consideration, he picked up a translucent perfume bottle, twisted it open, and pressed down on it, scattering the liquid inside it onto his body. This potion only had one use: eliminate his smell to make it identical to his surroundings. After putting down the bottle in his hand, Emlyn raised the brass bottle and downed the liquid inside. "A potions professor sure is troublesome," he mumbled, looking down as his hands became transparent. The brass bottle seemed to be floating in front of his sleeve. After Emlyn stuffed the tiny bottle away, all that was left was a formal suit, a top hat, and a pair of leather shoes without any buttons or laces. They formed a human shape as they moved about. Another completely transparent bottle resembling a perfume bottle flew over and floated in midair as it pressed itself, spurting the potion inside onto the clothes. Following that, the suit, top hat, and shoes turned faint and completely disappeared. After completing his invisibility, Emlyn glanced at the apartment where Russ Bathory had entered. He silently climbed a pipe, and he chased after him with extreme speed. While the window was still ajar, he floated inside like a transparent cloud, without causing so much as a stir. He hid in the corner as he watched the thin-faced but charming Russ Bathory search for the target. The latter slowly frowned since the place was empty. There wasn't even a mosquito, much less a person, despite the former becoming active in the past week. And this sanguine baron had already confirmed that the moon puppet was here. Suddenly, a creaking sound broke the frozen silence. The apartment's main door opened as a woman in a black dress leisurely walked in. When she saw Russ Bathory, she asked with an ethereal voice, "Who are you looking for?" Emlyn looked in the direction of the sound, and he saw a dark-skinned, long-browed face with soft outlines and a drooping mouth. It was none other than his target Windsor. However, in Emlyn's eyes, this primordial moon's devout believer had certain differences from her portrait. He discovered that her eyes, eyebrows, and mouth were curved up, like they were mimicking the crimson moon. And her forehead, cheeks, neck, and every layer of skin that she exposed had patches of withered grass and flowers. Man, what did Russ Bathory sell to her? Why would she become like this? Emlyn jumped in fright as he felt the hair on his back stand up. Meanwhile, withered grass mixed with dried flowers grew from the floor, walls, door, and ceiling in swaths. They began to isolate the room from the outside world, creating an extremely strange scene. Once Russ Bathory caught the smell of danger, he didn't attempt to converse with her. Without any hesitation, he took out a metal bottle and downed the liquid inside. "Pah!" He threw the bottle as his body dragged out after images as he pounced towards the mutated Windsor. His fingernails extended as they swirled with black gases. The withered grass and dry flowers that were embedded in Windsor's face made her look like a huge doll. She met him at an equally fast speed, clawing at Russ Bathory without any aversion to being injured. Bang! 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 After a series of collisions, Russ Bathory was sent flying back as he slammed into the wall. His sleeves were ripped apart, revealing the bone-deep scratches on his skin. And in the midst of his flesh, the withered grass and dried flowers slowly grew from the inside out. What a monster! This was the first time Emlyn was encountering such an enemy. He huddled in a corner and nearly forgot to help his kinsman. He didn't rashly appear as all kinds of thoughts flashed through his mind. As he observed the battle between Russ Bathory and Windsor, he considered how he should deal with the situation. The strangest of all is the withered grass and dried flowers. Withered grass and dried flowers. They're likely afraid of fire. Emlyn's heart stirred as he immediately abandoned his invisibility, took out another metal bottle, twisted its lid, and downed it. He then spewed out all the liquid in his mouth. The grayish-red liquid ignited upon contact with air, extending its scorching flames to the side. The flames stacked upon each other as the fire extended. Instantly, they engulfed the room in a scarlet ocean of fire. Amidst crackling sounds, the withered grass and flowers were ignited one after another as they rapidly spread the flames to their own kind. In just a few seconds, the sealed environment was on the brink of destruction. As for the grass and flowers on Windsor's body, they were also turning aflame. At this moment, Russ Bathory had a gaping hole dug through his chest, making him lose a great portion of his combat strength. He was relying on the Sanguine's extraordinary recovery ability to barely hold up. Seeing his enemy as a flaming torch, Emlyn acutely noticed that her aura was weakening. He didn't hesitate to lunge forward, circle around Windsor, and deliver several clawing swipes. Beneath his feet, wisps of black gas rose and swirled around the primordial moon believer like chains that bound her vitality. Bang! 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 Intense and short bursts sounded as the two figures suddenly closed the distance. All movement within the scene had vanished in the end as Emlyn grabbed Windsor's throat with his left hand, raising her up. After hesitating for a second, he saw her hideous appearance and snapped her neck. Pa! A thin, miniature wooden puppet embedded with withered grass and dried flowers fell from Windsor's body as the flames in the apartment gradually died out. Emlyn yanked Windsor's mutated head, turned around, and faced the heaving Russ Bathory. He then pressed his free right hand to his chest, and he bowed with a smile. Thank you for your help. Seeing Russ Bathory instantly turn furious and helpless, Emlyn added in great delight, remember to hand over the puppet and the Beyonder characteristic to Lord Nibs. They might be problematic. After saying that, black gases coagulated behind him, turning into two illusory bat wings. With a whoosh, Emlyn flapped these wings as he turned to fly out the window and land in the dark, nearby alley. When he landed, he quickly converged the black gases and turned to look around. Seeing that Russ Bathory hadn't followed him, Emlyn heaved a sigh of relief as he pressed his fist to his mouth. As he coughed, he mumbled, I hate fire. I hate smoke. He was just about to leave East Borough when he felt a chill run down his back. Emlyn's mind instantly tensed up as he held on to Windsor's mutated head, slowly turned around, and looked at the shadows in the corner. He first saw a very tiny figure before identifying it. The body was thin and long, akin to a wooden pole. Its eyes and mouth were curved like a crescent, and its surface was embedded with plenty of withered grass and dried flowers. It was none other than the moon puppet from before. It's targeting me. What the hell is this? I'm still very far from where Lord Nibs stays. It's really dangerous outside. Thoughts surfaced in Emlyn's mind as he felt his spine turn cold and his muscles turn tense. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, he suddenly had an idea. He stared at the moon puppet, and he murmured in ancient Hermes, the fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the grey fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Can't a man have some sleep in the middle of the night? Klein sat up as he rubbed his temples in fury. He quickly left his bed, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and he entered the space above the grey fog. He then took his seat that belonged to the fool. It's that fellow, Emlyn White? Klein gave a glance as he curiously emanated his spirituality, touching the crimson star that represented the moon. He then saw a stiffened Emlyn, and he saw the thin, strange puppet looking straight at him. The puppet was cloaked in a rich but illusory crimson moonlight. They were undulating like a tidal wave, making a connection with something high in the sky. At this moment, the crimson moonlight was spreading silently, enveloping Emlyn White within. There's a problem. There's something wrong with this puppet. Klein, who could see more with the grey fog's aid, didn't hesitate to summon the sea god's scepter from the junk pile into his hand. The blue gems on the end of the bone scepter lit up one after another, emitting a blinding luster. After chanting Mr. Fool's honorific name and seeking his assistance, Emlyn felt his already cold blood turn colder. It felt like it would slowly freeze into ice. This made his body rapidly turn stiff as he watched the moon puppet stumble and swagger towards him. At this moment, a silver bolt streaked down into the alley, causing all the gloom and darkness to scatter. Pa! The lightning bolt sizzled into a ball of lightning and landed on the moon puppet, drowning it in a swath of silver. The burst of light dissipated immediately as the strange puppet was left charred black. It lost its decorations as it collapsed. As for Emlyn, his blood no longer froze as it resumed its flow. With him quickly recovering from the stiffness, he knew that Mr. Fool was watching. He hurriedly asked softly, "Do you need? No, what can I sacrifice to you?" He always believed that Mr. Fool adhered to the principle of equivalent exchange. Therefore, he believed that he needed to pay a corresponding price for requesting his assistance. After a brief silence, he saw the boundless gray fog and the faint figure behind it. He then heard a lofty and magnificent voice. "That puppet." "All right." Emlyn took 2 steps forward, bent down to pick up the puppet and cleared up the scene before quickly leaving Eastborough. As for Klein, he cautiously used a paper angel to disrupt any divination before returning to the real world. Just as he was planning to head back to bed, he suddenly discovered the moonlight brighten outside as it seemed stained with blood. Klein walked to the window in puzzlement. When he looked out, he saw that the crescent had turned full at some point in time. It was scarlet red like blood. Another blood moon. Blood moon? Alger Wilson looked up at the sky as he steadily walked into the lightning cathedral ahead of him. This was the place he would be giving his report tomorrow. And in the middle of the island, at the peak of the towering mountain, there was another cathedral named the Chasm of Storm. It was the headquarters of the Church of Storm's headquarters, the holiest of holy temples. Inside the lightning cathedral, the high and spacious dome arched continuously. There wasn't any blank space, with gold and blue as the main colors. It made anyone who walked beneath it subconsciously feel that the place was sacred and solemn, thus, making them bow their heads. Alger Wilson often made contact with a secret existence, and he often gathered in the palace of a deity's residence. As a result, he no longer had a longing for this. He wasn't as respectful as before, but he still had to put on an act. Like the other sailors around him, he kept his head down as he lightened his footsteps without even daring to breathe clearly. In the silent atmosphere, they were led by the priest all the way to the clergyman's quarters at the back of the cathedral, with each of them getting a room. After closing the door, Alger saw the sanguine moonlight shine into the window. It made the environment turn cold and sinister, as though countless wraiths seemed to be observing the real world through a thin curtain. Every time the blood moon appeared, one's spirituality would be enhanced. Powers that stemmed from spirituality and hell would receive a significant boost, while the negative emotions of living beings reached an explosive state. The higher the sequence, the more obvious it would be. Faintly, Alger heard sobbing, low shouts, and whispering. This was completely different from the solemnity he previously felt in the lightning cathedral. Illusory arms appeared before his eyes as they reached outwards from the walls, floor, and ceiling, like a 3-dimensional pale forest. Alger knew of the abnormalities of the blood moon, so he removed his captain's hat without panicking at all. He entered the bathroom and washed his face. During this process, he suddenly heard a distant singing voice. The singing voice was indistinct, as though it came from the middle of the island. It kept echoing endlessly as though it was right beside Alger. It didn't make him feel horrified, for it was akin to a woman who was away from her family and loved ones, singing slowly and sadly as she looked at the surging tides. Alger pulled out a towel and wiped his face before cocking his head to listen. He gradually frowned as he took out a small iron box from his priest robe's inner robe and placed it close to his ear. In it was the ocean songster beyonder characteristic he had purchased from the world. He suspected that the residual mental imprint on it was temporarily enhanced by the blood moon. As the metal box came close, the singing by Alger's ears instantly became partially clear, melancholic, sorrowful, wistful, and painful. But apart from that, there was still the ethereal and ancient voice sounding from it, forming a clear boundary with the clear singing as though they were in a duet. Whose voice is that? It sounds like an elf's. An item in the church that stems from the elves? This ocean songster beyonder characteristic on me comes from an elf? Alger nodded as he came up with a theory. Due to them sharing the same sailor pathway, the Church of Storms had always been in search of elvish relics. They were used to concoct potions, made into sealed artifacts, or isolated underground. Those with relatively fewer negative effects were rewarded to clergymen, therefore, it wasn't odd that something similar would be stimulated on the night of the blood moon. If it's a mystical item, there wouldn't be a problem. If it's a sealed artifact, it means it's definitely not simple if the voice can penetrate the isolation barrier. Alger reined in his thoughts, brushed his teeth, and went to bed. He soon fell asleep and had a dream. After an unknown period of time, Alger suddenly felt a little lucid, vaguely aware that he was having a dream, but he automatically sized up his surroundings. He discovered that above him was rippling dark blue seawater which was stacked up layer after layer and blocked the view of the sky. Ahead of him was a beautiful palace made of coral. It was tall, spectacular, dark, and gloomy. Alger subconsciously walked towards the palace, walking into the open doors. Inside were columns of coral that held up an exaggerated dome. The walls and dome were filled with murals depicting the terror of a storm. Over 100 meters away, there was a throne embedded with sapphires, emeralds, and lustrous pearls above a 9-step staircase that was extremely striking. Alger looked over and saw a woman in a complicated ancient dress sitting on it. Her hair was black and held up into a bun. Her facial outline was soft, and her features were exquisite. She had a beauty that seemed timeless. The woman's expression was core and her ears sharp. Her deep brown eyes looked down at Alger from a commanding position. In her hand was a golden wine cup with complicated patterns. Alger was just about to say something when her eyes emitted silver light resembling the bright flash of lightning, tearing through the dream. Phew! Alger sat up and subconsciously gasped for breath. He found the dream both blurry and clear at the same time. The woman's appearance was blurry, as well as the details of the murals and coral palace, but her eyes that contained lightning and her sharp ears were clear. A high-ranking elf? Under the effects of the blood moon, her relics resonated with the ocean songster beyond her characteristic I have, resulting in it influencing my dream? As Alger guessed, he wondered which item it would be. Due to his limited standing, the number of sealed artifacts and mystical items he knew were limited. However, he knew certain knowledge that others didn't know, so he quickly thought of a possible target. Calamity Kohainam? The Book of Calamity she left behind has likely been sent to Pasu Island. After making the report and departing, I'll seek Mr. Fool's advice and see if there will be any unexpected influences regarding this matter. Alger didn't dare recite the Fool's honorific name in the Church of Storms headquarters. After daybreak, he didn't show any signs of abnormality. Under the servant's lead, he entered a room with a long table, and he was questioned by 3 mandated Punisher deacons. Among these 3 deacons, only one of them possessed dark blue hair. This was because this wasn't a necessary change that would happen from consuming the Sailor Pathway potion. However, this trait would quite stubbornly be passed down, just like the elves. Many of them with black hair would end up with blue hair. Nowadays, mixed bloods with elvish blood mostly had blue hair. Alger sat at the end of the long table as he systematically answered the deacon's questions. He mentioned what he had done at sea, what he had planned to do, and what he had succeeded, as well as his failures. And this would be compared to the description from his crew to prevent anyone from lying. Towards the end of his report, the deacon with dark blue hair glanced at Alger. He asked with a hoarse voice, "Do you know Admiral of Stars Catlia?" "Not only do I know her." Alger was nearly taken aback as he answered after some thought, "I met her at the pirate convention." The deacon didn't harp on the question as he directly said, "Think of means to get to know her. Try to investigate Gehrman Sparrow's situation from her." "So that's how it is. It's because Gehrman hunted Admiral of Blood?" Alger deliberately asked, feigning his ignorance, "What did Gehrman Sparrow do again?" The dark blue-haired deacon said in a peeved manner, "He nearly destroyed Byam." "Alright, this isn't something you should know. In summary, remember. Gehrman Sparrow is a very dangerous person. There's a secret cult backing him. That organization has a demigod that's at odds with the Rose School of Thought." "Nearly destroyed Byam? A demigod in the organization?" At odds with the Rose school of thought? Alger deliberately didn't hide his shock. He originally imagined that a focus was placed on Gehrman because of his hunting of Admiral of Blood Seigneur, but who knew that the reason was far more complicated and ludicrous than he had imagined. What did Gehrman Sparrow do? When I pass by him, I should find the actual spot to take a look. Also, isn't our tarot club's archenemy the Aurora Order? Isn't Mr. Fool always targeting the true creator? Why did it change? No, why is there the additional Rose school of thought? Alger muttered to himself inwardly. As for the tarot club having a demigod, he wasn't surprised. He even found it logical. How could an ancient existence not have a demigod under him? Besides, back when Vice Admiral Hurricane Kalangos died silently in a strange manner, he was already convinced that Mr. Fool had a high sequence blessed. Thankfully, my meeting with Gehrman was very secretive, otherwise, things would be troublesome. Alger listened in silence without asking any questions. Like before, he accepted the missions and got up to leave the room. Backlund's North Borough, outside 160 Backlund Street. Servants stood in 2 rows to welcome their master's arrival. With white hair at his temples and deep blue eyes, Duane Dantes wore a tailcoat and a top hat with an inlaid gold cane. Together with butler Walter and valet Richardson, he walked in between his servants and arrived at the entrance of the 3-story building. Waiting there was housekeeper Tanaja, who he had long selected. She was in her early 40s, and her hair was tied neatly. She had ordinary looks but wore an experienced demeanor. She wore gold-rimmed glasses and a black and white dress which was different from the other maidservants. From the information received and the interview, Klein knew that this lady was born in East Borough. She was a believer of the Evernight goddess, and she had chosen to be trained by a charitable organization by the church at the age of 15, making her become a qualified maidservant. After more than 10 years of hard work, as well as the free lessons from the night schools, she was promoted from the lowest-ranking maidservant in a tycoon's household to a lady's maid. She later followed the tycoon's daughter when she got married, and she became a housekeeper until the family met with a financial crisis, forcing her to leave. She was extremely experienced when it came to managing a household. After this lady signed the contract, she received £1,000 from Duane Dantes as petty cash for the month before entering an argument with butler Walter on whether they should purchase or rent a carriage. From her point of view, since Mr. Dantes's goal was to enter high society and move into West Borough, or even Empress Borough, a carriage needed to be custom-made to not appear inadequate. Before that, they could rent a high-end carriage for a year and wait until there was hope of him becoming a noble before they had one custom-made. It was a more reasonable choice that didn't waste money or appear inadequate. She convinced Walter, and of course Klein. This was because renting a high-end carriage with the horse costs only £88, and a 2-wheeled carriage costs only £42. Of course, someone who controls the household's expenditures needs to be someone who's good at accounting. Klein felt poignant as he smiled at Tanaja before stepping through the 3-story house's door. This was the stage for which the tycoon, Duane Dantes, would be acting on. Upon entering the house, the first thing Klein saw was the foyer. It was very spacious here, with several chairs and umbrellas placed there. Furthermore, the furnishing was elegant, and the decorations were befitting of his status. If he hadn't known of the structure ahead of time from his inspection, Klein might have imagined it to be the living room. After passing through a second main door, the sight before his eyes opened up. It was a huge hall that could accommodate dozens of dancing guests. In the middle of the hall was a brightly colored, thick, and plush carpet. Surrounding it were spaces covered with bright marble tiles, with a piano, stone sculptures, and other decorations decorating the hall. There were also stone columns that held up the second floor with inlaid ornaments. To the left was a series of floor-to-ceiling windows, and beyond them was a lush, green lawn and blooming garden. To the right were walls, wooden doors, and a corridor that led to the lounges, storerooms, washrooms, kitchen, and butler's room, etc. The hall was 2 stories high, and there was a crystal chandelier hanging down from the ceiling. It instantly made one imagine what it would look like when night fell. Ahead of him were 2 staircases that led to the second floor. The winding corridor here was square in shape, and the emptied-out section in the middle happened to be where the carpeted hall was. All Klein needed to do was hold a cup of wine and stand behind the railings of the second floor, and he could leisurely take in the sights of a ball below. There were many rooms on the second floor. There was a living room, an activity room, a dining room, washrooms, a billiard room, and many bedrooms. If any guests needed to stay for the night, they would stay there. Similarly, on the second floor, there were 2 staircases that led to the third floor. That was where Duane Dantes stayed. There was an exaggerated master bedroom, with a bar counter-equipped open room that allowed one to sunbathe and enjoy the scenery. There was a study which could be deemed as a miniature library, as well as 2 changing rooms and small bedrooms for the valet and the maid on night duty. There were also rooms meant for the household members and bathrooms, but Klein was currently a single man. As for the other servants, they lived in a terrace house behind the main mansion. In another direction was the stable. The mansion's underground area was equally spacious with a huge storeroom and wine cellar. Taking off his coat, Klein stood on the balcony in the half-open room on the third floor with his back straight. He took in the sights of the surrounding streets and couldn't help but sigh inwardly. There really is a reason why it's so expensive. The rent of £315 really can't be considered a waste. He had already paid a year's rent yesterday afternoon, and he could only force himself to enjoy this place that he rented. Meanwhile, he had also directly paid Walter a year's salary of £115. As it was very possible that he would flee once he obtained the Antigonus family's notebook, he didn't want to affect his butler's livelihood. By the same logic, he had long paid housekeeper Tanaja her annual salary of £42. It allowed this lady to realize how generous Mr. Duane Dantes was, as well as how mannered he was. Through the 2 head servants' negotiations and hard work, they hired all the servants. The annual salary of a male steward was £30, his valet, Richardson, was £35, the 2 footmen in charge of valeting guests and serving at the dining table each received £30, the 2 ladies' maids were £18 each, the 2 chambermaids were £12 each, and the 2 handymen were £12 each. Apart from them, the cook was £30, the assistant cook was £15, the scullery maid was £13, the parlour maid was £11, the nursery governess was £25, the steward's boy was £10, the 2 coachmen were £25 each, the 2 gardeners were £20 each, the 2 laundresses were £10 each, all for a total of £413. It cost about £8 a week. Together with the 2 head servants' annual salary, Klein needed to pay £570 a year, making it approximately £11 a week. This was still without including the expenditures for food, clothes, and all kinds of daily necessities. I'll pay £10 to £20 a week without any income the moment I open my eyes. Klein did a mental calculation as he forced himself to cast his gaze onto the garden. In the afternoon, he had paid off the rental fee for the 2 carriages and servants' first week's salary. Together with him giving housekeeper Tanaja £1,000 for the daily expenses, he only had £1,286 and 18 gold coins left. However, he would receive the payments from Miss Justice and Ma'am Hermit within the week. I wonder how long that £1,000 can last Tanaja. Just to store up the required alcoholic beverages for the balls would cost a few £100s. The rich Mr. Duane Dantes fell into deep thought and could hardly extricate himself from it. To calm his emotions, he decided to head above the grey fog while the butler and servants were busy with handling the household chores. He wanted to study the strange puppet which Emlyn White and sacrificed. After the blood moon happened, Klein had no choice but to return to the mysterious world and pull furs into it. He resisted the urge to sleep as he listened to her drone on about her daily life in Backland. After everything was over, he was just too tired. He accepted Emlyn's sacrifice, and after confirming that there wasn't anything weird, he returned to the real world and collapsed into bed. After straightening his stylish dark-colored vest, Klein walked to the door and said to the awaiting valet, "Richardson, I have a habit of sleeping in the afternoon for 45 minutes. I don't want anyone disturbing me." "Yes, sir," Richardson answered humbly. He was an illegitimate son with mixed blood. His father was Loenese, a supervisor at a manor, while his mother was a native from East Balam who was a slave in the same manor. After he was born, he was met with discrimination and bullying. This resulted in a weak and submissive character, and because he was good-looking, he was suitable for valeting guests. He was selected by the manor's master to be a valet before being brought to Backland. After both houses of the Loen Kingdom had abolished slavery, he found himself out of a job. All he could do was seek the help of the City Family Servant Assistance Association. Before Klein, he had served 2 households and committed some mistakes, but he did build up a wealth of experience. He caught Butler Walter's notice, and he became Dwayne Dantes' valet. After looking at Richardson, who stood straight and tall, with a height that was almost identical to himself, Klein indiscernibly shook his head and sighed. This guy that can clearly be a celebrity with his looks can only be a servant in this day and age. Furthermore, he's such a tall man, but he appears cowardly and weak. However, this can also be considered an advantage. He's obedient, silent, and submissive. He does whatever his master instructs him to do, and he will absolutely not dare to make his own decisions. If I only have a valet with me requiring him to handle all kinds of matters, Richardson will definitely not be up to mark. However, I still have Butler Walter and so many other servants. He can handle the other matters with his experience and capabilities. Without musing further, Klein locked the door and returned to the side of the reclining chair. He took 4 steps counterclockwise and entered above the gray fog. He sat at the seat of the fool, and he beckoned with his hand to make the charred moon puppet fly over and land before him. After scrutinizing it, Klein didn't discover anything odd about it. Hence, he conjured a pen and paper and wrote the divination statement, its origins. Putting down his fountain pen, Klein waited a few seconds before picking up the piece of paper and leaning back against his chair. My spiritual intuition didn't stop me from making the divination statement. It means that the latent danger of the moon puppet isn't as bad as the Rose school of thought beyond her characteristic. Klein mumbled as he skillfully recited the divination statement. In the gray, hazy world, he saw an altar with a circle of fiery torches around it. On the altar, there was what he suspected to be human skin with traces of blood everywhere. In the middle were 3 candles and a few puppets that resembled thin wooden poles. These miniature puppets had curved eyes and mouths, as though they corresponded to the crimson crescent in the sky. Therefore, they continued hanging their creepy smiles as withered grass and dried flowers remained embedded in their bodies. A priest in a dark red robe was circling the altar with heavy steps, as though he was dancing a dance created by an epileptic patient. At some point in time, moonlight gathered and shone on the puppet as it increased in brightness. Towards the end, it resembled the gentle ebbing of water waves. The ritual quickly came to an end as the priest picked up a thin puppet and walked to the human body bound to a frame beside him. Instantly, he stabbed it through the body's eye socket. Amidst tragic cries, the scene quickly changed. The dead man with the moon puppet in his eye socket was buried somewhere in an orderly manner. The scene once again skipped and showed further development. Every full moon or blood moon, the moon's glow would scatter over the grave, seeping into it like water as the surrounding darkness turned gloomy. Klein opened his eyes and adjusted his seating posture. He had a general idea of the moon puppet's origins. It came from a prayer ritual to the primordial moon. It was a ritual lasting for centuries. Over the past few centuries, they had absorbed the powers of the crimson moon, mutating bit by bit until they were exhumed by the colonists. They usually didn't exhibit any oddity, and something only happened when a primordial moon believer activated them with the correct method. As for what would happen, Klein had no idea. In a particular sense, these primitives are equivalent to the primordial moon's chosen ones. Last night, after I smote one to death, that evil god was enraged, thus, causing the blood moon? Klein gently tapped the mottled table's edge as he came to a preliminary judgment. The primordial moon's wrath directly changed the moon's phenomena, making it a blood moon. If this theory is right, it means that in the domain of the crimson moon, the goddess is inferior to the primordial moon. She might only have the title and name as she grasps a grade 0 sealed artifact. Klein nodded slightly as he attempted to divine the weaknesses of the moon puppet. This time, he saw sunlight and lightning. This means that the Beyonder powers in the sun domain and lightning from the storm domain are best at dealing with it. As Klein interpreted the information, he threw the moon puppet into the junk pile and returned to the real world. An hour later, Walter, who was wearing a starched suit and white gloves, knocked on the door. He bowed and said, "Sir, I'll be printing your name card in a while. They will be sent to the neighbors along with some gifts. They will take a few days to observe to determine your situation. If they're willing to accept you, they would send gifts and invite you to be their guests. Does your name card need a title added?" Title. The fool that doesn't belong to this era? Klein lampooned as he replied with a smile, "Merchant Dwayne Dantes from Desi would suffice." Walter nodded and said, "Based on your wishes, I'll immediately arrange for you to have etiquette lessons. The focus will be on dancing, and I've hired a professional teacher." Having read many magazines, Klein knew that the social life he wanted to enter had many balls, so he wasn't surprised by Walter's suggestion. He said with a nod, "Okay." With that said, he looked sideways at his valet, Richardson. "Prepare the carriage. I'll be heading over to St. Samuel Cathedral." Klein vividly remembered that his main goal was to act as a devout believer of the Evernight goddess in order to get to know the corresponding clergyman, and from there he would find a way to sneak into Cheney's Gate. Therefore, he planned to pray at the cathedral whenever he had the time to express his sincerity and get to know the members of the clergy. "Yes, sir," Richardson answered politely. Before long, Klein boarded his rented luxurious four-wheeled carriage, decked out in a coat and a top hat. As he enjoyed the scenery on his journey, he sampled the black tea that was adorned with a slice of lemon. In fact, there was a tiny bar counter in the carriage, and in it, Butler Walter had specially prepared golden lanty, winter black rand, and other distilled liquor, as well as all kinds of red and white wine that came from Intis. However, Klein wasn't someone who enjoyed drinking. As a Beyonder, he didn't like the feeling of being tipsy. It made him recall the feeling of losing control, therefore, he used the excuse of him heading to the cathedral, so as to get his valet, Richardson, to prepare a pot of Marquis black tea. "If it's possible, I would actually like a cup of sweet iced tea." "It's something from the south," Klein said half-jokingly to Richardson. "I will prepare it next time," Richardson immediately replied. Klein chuckled and shook his head. "No, there's no need. That wouldn't appear decent. Once I'm more familiar with the neighbors, and have hosted a Desi-style banquet, we can prepare some sweet iced tea." "Heh, I believe their children will like it." When Richardson realized that he had mistaken his employer's intentions, he hurriedly said in a fluster, "I will keep it in mind." It only took 20 minutes to go from 160 Buckland Street to the St. Samuel Cathedral at Phelps Street on foot. If it wasn't because he needed to hire a coachman and rent a carriage to project an image befitting his status, Klein would rather walk over to digest his food and strengthen his body. Soon, the carriage stopped along the square outside the cathedral. Klein held his golden-laid cane, got out of the carriage, and stopped there to enjoy the pigeons' dance. After entering the cathedral and coming to the main prayer hall, he passed his top hat and cane to Richardson. He found a seat near the aisle and sat down. He lowered his head, clasped his hands, and seriously and silently prayed. Richardson sat behind him to his side, putting the items in place as he glanced at the dark sacred emblem on the altar. He then closed his eyes. In the serene atmosphere, Klein felt his spirituality lightly scatter. He wasn't too surprised by this, because the praying masses in the cathedral would encounter something similar. The tiny bits of spirituality that carried pious beliefs gathered together to provide power to the Cheney's Gate seals underground. After an unknown period of time, his spiritual perception triggered as he opened his eyes and looked diagonally across him. Standing there was an elder dressed in a black clergyman robe. His hair was sparse, and his face looked pale. He resembled a dead man. From afar, he had a cold aura with a lacking expression. He blended in with the prayer hall's dark environment to a certain extent. A keeper. Klein made a judgment from a single glance. He closed his eyes again and continued praying. Of course, he had already remembered the man's facial features. Big nose, grayish-blue eyes, loose facial skin, and no facial hair. The elder dressed as a clergyman had sat down as well. He focused on praying to the goddess. Inside the prayer hall, the wall in front had a few holes. Pure light shone in from them like resplendent stars. It made the dark environment appear gentle and holy. Time ticked by as Klein felt his spiritual perception trigger again. He carefully opened his eyes and saw that the black-robed keeper had left his seat and entered a passageway to the side. That should lead to the back of the cathedral. The keepers stay inside the cathedral? They have no family and don't have their own residences? From their conditions, it's not that surprising either. Furthermore, the keepers of Cheney's Gate are monitored by the bishops, so it's a normal precaution. This means that I have to become friends with the priests and bishops of St. Samuel Cathedral to obtain the freedom to enter the area at the back of the cathedral. Klein didn't sneak any more glances as he closed his eyes and considered various problems. After some time, he slowly got up and walked to the altar. Standing in front of the donation box, he took out £50 in cash and devoutly threw it in. This made the bishop and priest on duty look over. Their gaze turned friendly as they remembered his appearance. After doing that, Klein nodded gently at the clergyman, turned around, and walked down the aisle towards the exit. Richardson held his hat and cane and followed closely behind. Once out the prayer hall, he walked towards the main entrance alongside a series of intricate murals and colored pane windows that lined the top. At this point, a few figures walked in. Leading them was a middle-aged man with long sideburns and soft facial features. He wore a black trench coat without any gloves, nor did he carry a cane. Behind him was a young man dressed in a similar trench coat. He had black hair and green eyes, and he looked handsome with his randomly styled hair. He looked like he hadn't combed it after waking up in the morning. Klein was especially familiar with his looks and figure. It felt as though they hadn't seen each other for years. Leonard Mitchell. Klein's pupils constricted a little, but he didn't stop at all. He maintained his pace and stride, and he walked towards the few nighthawks in black trench coats. Yes, Klein was certain that they were nighthawks. When they met, he casually swept a gaze at Leonard and company before passing them and walking towards the main entrance. The main entrance was open, and the clouds outside were thin. There was plenty of sunlight and pigeons were flying. Leonard Mitchell glanced at the believers who walked past him out of boredom, and he retracted his gaze. He said with a sigh, "I hope we can stay in Backland for a few days this time to have a good rest." The case this time wasn't only dangerous and thrilling, but it also required us to be tense the entire time. His team of Red Gloves had just cracked a human skin-donning devil case, and they had captured 2 targets. This seemed easy on the surface, but it wasn't simple at all. They went through plenty of setbacks and tribulations before completing the mission with great difficulty. Every member was exhausted both in mind and body. Captain Soest shook his head with a smile. "This is the life of us Red Gloves. You should have known that this would be how it would be back when you chose to join. However, congratulations on advancing to Sol Assurer." Leonard Mitchell curled his lips into a smile. "It's slower than I had expected. Also, Captain Soest, you've finally reached Sequence 5. This isn't a problem with the church. If I could have endured it better, I could have become a spirit warlock earlier." Soest wiped his smile away as he walked into the prayer hall's corridor. "Pray to the goddess. It will effectively eliminate your mental stress, allowing you to recover." As he spoke, the team of Red Gloves entered the dark and serene hall as they found a spot to sit down. Leonard was just about to focus on praying when he suddenly heard a slightly aged voice ring in his mind. "That person from just now is problematic." "Who?" Leonard kept his head down as he asked with a suppressed voice. The slightly aged voice replied, "One of the men you met at the entrance. I'm living in your body, and my strength hasn't recovered, so I wasn't able to see too clearly." Leonard recalled and asked softly, "What do you mean by problematic?" "He has an ancient aura. A beyonder who has lived for a very long period of time." Leonard mumbled, I will try to investigate. Simultaneously, he thought, old man must be hiding certain things. He seldom volunteers to tell me that someone is problematic, yet be so vague about it. After I find the target and confirm that there's no danger for the time being, I'll leave it. I don't want to be embroiled in the conflict of some undying monsters from the fourth epoch. If that person will really bring about a calamity, I'll directly report it to the Archbishop. In an apartment in Sherwood Borough. This the money I borrowed from you. Furs handed £220 to Zio. She had already received the £100 from Mr. Moon and the £500 from Mam Hermit. Zio Daricha grabbed at her messy blonde, unsmooth hair, looked at the money, and raised her head to look at Furs. She blurted, you really are involved in illegal gambling? I have to tell you that such gambling must be a scam and a trap. They let you win in order to make you lose more. Even though you're a trickmaster and have a chance of fooling them, such gambling scams might have other beyonders hiding in it. Stop, stop, stop. Furs lowered her hands. She said in bemused anger, do I look like someone who will participate in illegal gambling? Yes. Zio didn't hesitate in her reply. If I didn't stop you, you wouldn't just be smoking cigarettes, you'd even be smoking cannabis. That's because I needed to numb myself due to the pain brought by the full moon's ravings. I no longer need to. Furs didn't debate with Zio as she directly explained, I sold the mysticism knowledge I know at a Beyonder gathering. Heh, that person was very generous and had paid several £100s. Is that so? Zio instantly threw the problem to the back of her mind and said, there's been a new Beyonder gathering that appeared recently in East Borough. I've been invited. A new Beyonder gathering? Furs was first taken aback before feeling a sense of anticipation. According to her teacher, Dorian Gray, and Mr. Fool, she knew that Louis Veen was an oracle of the Aurora Order. His arrival in Backland was likely to replace the missing Mr. A, so as to rebuild the Aurora Order faction in this big city. Therefore, there was a solid chance that he had disguised himself to organize a new Beyonder gathering. Furs thought for a moment and said seemingly mindlessly to Zio, are you going to join it? Of course, I have to prepare the interrogator formula potion, Zio answered decisively. Furs nodded and covered her mouth to yawn. Remember to bring me along when you have the privilege of inviting a new member. Late at night. 7, Pinster Street. Leonard Mitchell sat on a chair with his legs raised onto the side of his desk. Following that, he leaned back, causing the wooden headrest to creak from the pressure. His breathing gradually turned long and slow. After an unknown period of time, his eyelids drooped and covered his eyes. At this moment, Leonard's spirit had arrived in a gray, hazy world, but he was still in his bedroom. He flew to the window and saw thick gray fog blanket the nearby streets and extend outwards. It seemed to be embracing all of Backland. The street lamps along the streets and the warm light from the different houses appeared abnormally dim. They were only able to illuminate a very tiny region, and everything seemed to be tainted with a sense of blurriness. At the same time, blobs of illusory oval lights appeared as they enveloped a house in an intersecting manner, as though it was the source of their existence. This was the city through a nightmare's eyes. Leonard followed up on his previous investigations and leaped out the window in a nightmare state. He then flew to 17 Minsk Street. He didn't attempt to storm in. He stood at the door in the thick fog as he politely pulled the doorbell. Cuckoo. Cuckoo. Dressed in her nightgown, Stellan Sammer opened the door. She placed her silver-inlaid pleated fan at her chest as she asked in confusion and puzzlement, who are you looking for? She was none other than Klein's landlord back when he was acting as Sherlock Moriarty. She was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed lady in her 30s. Leonard had already changed into a black and white checkered police uniform. He casually showed his identification and asked, do you know Sherlock Moriarty? Trapped in the dream, Stellan's reaction was very slow. She asked after a few seconds, did something happen to him? Just as she asked, her impression of Sherlock Moriarty appeared beside her under Leonard's influence. He wore a half-top hat, a double-breasted frock coat, gold-rimmed spectacles on his nose, and a bushy mustache around his mouth. This was identical to the information he previously received about Sherlock Moriarty. Hence, he didn't show any doubts and said, "He's been involved in a case and is undergoing an investigation. I hope you can cooperate with us." All right. Stellan wished to raise her chin, but for some reason, she felt a little horrified. Leonard thought for a second and asked, "Since when did he rent this place from you?" "Early September last year," Stellan said after recalling her memories. Leonard continued asking, "What do you know of him? Or should I say, what kind of person do you think he is?" When that was mentioned, Stellan appeared as though she had long considered the answer to such a question. "He comes from Mid-Seashire, and he has an accent from that area. He's a very capable detective, and he once exposed the adultery which Mary's husband was undertaking. However, his income isn't too high. He doesn't even hire a full-time housemaid. All he can do is get my maid to help him part-time. My children tell me that he's good at telling stories, especially detective-related stories. This might be why he had chosen this profession." Without giving Leonard a chance to interrupt her, she droned on incessantly, "He's not as boorish like the typical detective. He went to grammar school and studied history. What leaves me most envious of all is how he obtained Mary's gratitude. He joined the Quelag Club where its members are people with significant status. I've only been there a few times. Later, he apparently became famous in the detective circles, and private detectives often came to look for him." Leonard lost his patience listening to her drone on as he couldn't help but rub his temples. He had failed to obtain any useful information from Mrs. Stellan. Apart from Sherlock Moriarty's poor financial situation and him being good at telling detective stories, the rest was within the scope of what he had previously investigated. He even knew that Sherlock Moriarty had good ties with Isengard Stanton. "Next, I'll investigate those from the Quelag Club who have good relationships with Sherlock Moriarty." Once he patiently finished listening to Mrs. Stellan's droning, he immediately thanked her and left her dream. 160 Buckland Street. Inside Dwayne Dantes' mansion. In the hall that could accommodate more than 100 dancers, Klein was embracing a lady in her 30s as they danced. This was the etiquette teacher that Walter had hired. Her name was Wiana Heisen. She had a common name, but she wasn't ordinary at all. Her facial features were only above average, but her disposition was impeccable. Her every action was filled with charm. According to Walter's introduction, she was born in a baron's family. She received a good education from a young age and later entered the palace. She had the job of court lady until she was married. As her family had declined and her husband's financial situation was only ordinary, being a believer in the Evernight goddess prompted her to choose to become a private tutor in etiquette. She often went to the families of nobles and tycoons to teach their children. Although the butler didn't spell it out, Klein knew that he couldn't perform badly in front of this lady, or there was no way to save his reputation. The way members of high society asked about a person's situation was mainly through common acquaintances. And at times, the interaction between servants also mattered. With nimble footsteps and graceful moves, the black-haired Wiana nodded approvingly. "Mr. Dantes, it's hard for me to imagine you not having learned these dance steps before. In less than half an hour, you're as skilled as a noble who received education on this from a young age. It's all thanks to your teachings." Klein gave a humble smile as he wore a warm, humble look. With the clown's balance, dancing was a very easy matter for him. Wiana lowered her head and chuckled softly. "You're a gentleman who can really make a lady happy." She immediately raised her light brown eyes and swept her gaze across Dwayne Dantes' silver sideburns and deep blue eyes. "That's the best praise I've heard today," Klein replied with a smile. During this period, his feet kept moving as he spun Wiana gently around. Not far away, the hired quartet's melodious music echoed through the hall. He had the intention to have close ties with Wiana, not to improve his reputation, but because she was once a court lady. After Wiana corrected a minor mistake that Dwayne Dantes committed, she said, "When inviting a lady to dance, it's not only a dance. You also need to converse. You can't be like two dolls unless both of you are so immersed in the dance and music's rhythm that you do not wish to speak." Of course, that's also a form of communication of the heart. When conversing, you must be euphemistic because this is Loen, not intus. To put it simply, do not be direct and crude. You need to appear gentlemanly. Let me raise an example. If you wish to compliment a lady for her perfume, you can't directly tell her how nice it smells, nor ask what kind of perfume it is to praise her. You need to connect a more euphemistic meaning to it and mention that. Yes, you can say something like, "It feels like I'm out in the spring meadows." Of course, this needs to match the traits of perfume. There's no literary feel. Shouldn't you say that the moon is beautiful, isn't it? Klein lampooned with a Japanese-styled euphemism as he said with a self-deprecating smile, "Thank you for not telling me that my praises weren't gentlemanly enough." Wahana's smile deepened. "Mr. Dantes, do you know what kind of gentleman is very welcomed by women at social events?" "Pray, do tell." Klein honestly shook his head. Wahana said without a change in her smile, "The second most popular type are men who make women think that he's very intelligent." "What about the first?" Klein asked cooperatively. Wahana glanced at him and said, "The most popular type are men who make women think that they are very intelligent." Upon saying that, she smiled and didn't say another word. Klein instantly understood she was hiding her praise in between the lines. So this is Loen-styled euphemism. It's not like intus where they just aim straight for the lower half of the body. That's what's written in papers and magazines. I've no way of confirming what real intus social events are like. Anyway, both countries often sully each other. The emperor's era does match that description though. Klein nodded in enlightenment. The 2-hour etiquette lesson ended in a harmonious mood. Klein walked teacher Wahana Heisen to the door with butler Walter and valet Richardson before giving her a tiny gift. It was moonlight, a perfume from the Dream Company. It was mixed with grey amber, making it rather expensive. As for how much it was, Klein wasn't sure, as housekeeper Tanaja was responsible for buying it. The payment was through her. Only when the £1,000 was almost expended would she come to him with receipts and a list for him to vet so as to receive fresh funds. The reason why Klein knew the company and perfume was that his butler had informed him ahead of time. It was to prevent him from appearing insincere if Mam Wahana were to ask. From this detail, he had a deep understanding of the use of a good butler. Watching the satisfied Mam Wahana Heisen leave, Klein held back the urge to rub his temples as he sighed inwardly. This is more tiring than a beyonder battle. I have to constantly watch my actions and deliberate over my words. I need some rest. At that point, the white-gloved Walter took a step forward and said, "Sir, since you wish for your etiquette studies to progress faster, we can move the remaining lessons forward." "What lessons?" Klein felt a headache. "History, international politics, philosophy, music, as well as general knowledge of sports like golf, racing, hunting." Walter answered meticulously. "Philosophy?" Klein asked in surprise. Walter nodded. "It's one of the most common topics discussed in high society. You don't need to have very deep research into it, but you need to know what others are discussing. You need to know that the origins of philosophy stem from Kongsoka, Merdi, and Patterson, and not Emperor Roselle. You need to know that man was born free came from Lumi. When tycoons first enter high society, many of them often make mistakes in such aspects. They're used to attributing certain sentences and philosophical thoughts to Emperor Roselle." Klein felt his head ache the more he heard. He forcefully smiled and said, "I haven't got any matters to do recently, apart from my afternoon naps and heading to the cathedral. You can arrange the lessons to be at any time." In a dark room, a letter floated up and opened by itself before shaking the piece of paper. In her tiny bonnet, Sharon's figure was outlined. She grasped the letter and seriously read through it. She then wrote a reply and set up a ritual to summon Sherlock Moriarty's messenger. During this process, she didn't forget to prepare a gold coin. Soon, Sharon finished the incantation as she watched the candle flame burgeon and be tainted with a gloomy green color. Rionette Tinker, with the 4 blonde, red-eyed heads in hand, appeared out of the candlelight and appeared before Sharon. Sharon's eyes constricted as her doll-like face suddenly showed immense emotional fluctuations. She blurted out, "Teacher. Haven't you already?" 160 Buckland Street. In the sunny study. The bookshelves were orderly arranged with a huge collection. At a glance, one appeared as though they had stepped into a private library. Klein sat on a high-backed chair as he read the newspapers. He discovered that be it the Tussock Times or the Backland Daily Tribune, there was an additional advertisement in a striking spot. It advertised selling 10% of the Backland Bike Company's shares. "Mr. Stanton is rather efficient. It's only been a few days, and he has completed the financial checks and evaluation." Klein silently reflected on the matter when his spiritual perception was triggered. He quickly activated his spirit vision and saw Rionette Tinker walk out of the void. She still held the 4 blonde, red-eyed heads in her hand, with one of them having a letter in its mouth. "It's likely a reply from Miss Sharon." As Klein had these thoughts, he reached out to receive it and nodded. "Thank you." As he spoke, he subconsciously glanced at the door because standing outside was his valet, Richardson. After tearing open the envelope and unfolding the letter, Klein quickly scanned it, confirming that it was written by Sharon. She indicated that she had no intention of buying biological poison bottle, and she might only consider it after a period of time if it was still available. She's in a tight financial situation? Or is she saving money to do something important? Klein casually thought and instinctively felt that it was the latter. This was because it was impossible for the demigod named Zatwin to keep staying in Backland. For now, Sharon and Merrick had escaped the pursuit of the Rose School of Thought, and with their beyonder powers and unique traits about their sequences, it wasn't difficult for them to amass money in a relaxed environment. Furthermore, they seemed to be in charge of the illegal arms dealing in the Bravehearts bar, and they were the backers behind Ian. Just this alone would make them plenty of money. As he thought about it, Klein looked up and saw Miss Messenger's 8 red eyes looking at him intently. He jumped in fright, imagining that she was urging him to pay the debt he owed her. He cleared his throat and said, "There's no need to reply. I'll be paying the first installment within the week." Rionette Tinker's 4 heads spoke one after another. "There's no rush. There's no interest. Miss Messenger is quite nice after all." As Klein sighed, Rionette Tinker vanished from her spot, returning back into the depths of the spirit world. After burning the letter and resting for half an hour, he walked to the door to inform Richardson to prepare the carriage. He planned on heading to the cathedral before his philosophy class in the afternoon. The journey there was smooth sailing, and Klein arrived at the square outside St. Samuel Cathedral after a few sips of tea. After gaining the serenity from taking in the sights of the pigeons, he strode towards the cathedral's main door, entered the prayer hall, and randomly found a pew to sit at. Like before, Richardson sat diagonally behind him with his master's hat and cane. As he emptied his mind during his prayers, Klein's spiritual perception was triggered once again. He instinctively opened his eyes and looked left. He saw the black-haired, green-eyed Leonard Mitchell. This nighthawk wasn't wearing a trench coat. He looked casual with his white shirt tucked out while matching them with straight trousers and a black vest. Seeing the middle-aged man with gray streaks at his sideburns look at him, he smiled with a nod, retracted his gaze, and closed his eyes in a bid to pretend to pray. He wasn't worried that the man would discover that he was watching him, because he had only done a cursory sweep without any additional actions. Many believers present had similar actions as well. It was inevitable for a good-looking, dignified gentleman to attract some attention when he entered. Leonard Mitchell was someone who often attracted such attention, so he knew this very well. At this moment, the slightly aged voice sounded in his mind. "It's him. He didn't make my hard work of running over to the cathedral yesterday and today be in vain." Leonard thought smugly as his expression remained stoic. Klein was also pretending to pray as puzzlement surfaced in his thinking mind. When did this fellow, Leonard, become so pious? Although he's definitely more pious than me, he's not the kind of person who would come to the cathedral every day. He would come once or twice a week at best. What's his goal for coming? He seemed to be observing me just now. Upon having this thought, Klein suddenly realized something. The grandpa in him is the angel of the Zoroast family, which makes him an angel of the Marauder pathway. Blasphemer Amon is a king of angels of this pathway. He could discover the gray fog and even tried to infiltrate it. So, it's very possible that the grandpa in Leonard can also sense the gray fog or the traces of its powers on me. Upon making this judgment, Klein immediately felt his heart in his throat. He felt like dangerous traps were surrounding him. He maintained his praying posture, and the eyes under his eyelids remained motionless. His entire person was calm and reserved, completely identical to the cathedral's atmosphere. After an unknown period of time, he slowly got up and walked to the altar. He came before the donation box and threw in a total of 50 pounds in cash. Following that, he did the same as before, smiling at the bishop and priest on duty while nodding. He received a rather friendly response. The moment he walked out of St. Samuel Cathedral, Klein received his hat from Richardson, and he fed the pigeons on the square for about 10 minutes. And behind him, the believers who had finished their prayers walked out, including Leonard Mitchell. Without looking at the entrance, Klein leisurely clapped his hands, took his golden-laid cane, and walked to the nearby four-wheeled carriage. Leonard was similarly feeding the pigeons on the square, but he didn't have any intention of following when he saw his target leave on the carriage. Since the person had an ancient aura and that the parasite in him placed such importance on him, he obviously didn't dare to be careless. He didn't act directly, as it was extremely dangerous. He planned on making superficial investigations to gather the required intelligence. I'll see what old man has to say when the time comes. Besides, it's not like there's no direction for investigation at the moment. There can't be that many of that particular type of high-end carriage in Backland. No matter if it's his, or if it's rented, it's easy to determine the source. Then, I'll know the identity and background of that gentleman. Leonard glanced at the pigeons as he thought leisurely. He was an experienced nighthawk, and he was even an elite red glove among the nighthawks. At this moment, a pigeon spread its wings and flew over. In its beak there appeared to be a paper slip. Leonard frowned as he reached out his left palm and saw the pigeon fly down before dropping the slip. Then, it flapped its wings and flew off. Raising the paper slip, Leonard warily unfolded it while feeling puzzled. He saw 2 lines of text on it. Zoroast. Parasite. This. Leonard's pupils suddenly constricted as he felt all his hair stand up. His emotions nearly exploded at that very instant. That gentleman has seen through my secret? As expected of someone with an ancient aura. He might be one of the undying monsters that remained from the 4th epoch. He's warning me? That I shouldn't involve myself in his matters or even come close to him? At that moment, Leonard felt that every action the middle-aged man with white sideburns and blue eyes had done had left him shocked when he recalled them. He was someone not to be looked at directly or approached. He immediately lost all thoughts of investigating the man. As he watched the pigeons land, he said with a suppressed voice, "Old man, he might be an old friend of yours. If you wish to investigate, then it's best that you wait till your strength recovers." Old friend. The slightly aged voice repeated the 2 words as though he found it suspect but couldn't be certain. Leonard quickly converged his emotions and chuckled. "So you're someone from the Zoroast family." At this moment, about 100 meters away, at the intersection of Phelps Street and the other streets, the black-haired Dwayne Dantes, who had streaks of gray hair, leaned onto the wall as he slowly closed his eyes, hiding his wrinkled facial features in the shadows of the carriage. To the side of his valet, Richardson, a middle-aged man wearing a dark red coat and old triangular hat, appeared, bowing to his master before disappearing. No one saw this illusory figure. The carriage slowly turned as a flock of pigeons flew up from the square. After returning home and entering the room with the huge balcony, the silent Klein finally heaved a silent sigh of relief. If Leonard didn't accept the warning because of the grandpa's bewitchment, he planned on writing another slip with the contents, "I know where Blasphemer Amon is." In between the lines, it means I'll tell Blasphemer Amon that there's a Zoroast family angel here if you foil my plans. This wouldn't make the grandpa believe that Dwayne Dantes was so weak that he had to rely on others to fend him off. It was more of a friendly warning that wouldn't number beyond 3 times, a form of respect towards an angel. If 2 warnings weren't enough to rein him in, there was no other choice but to inform blasphemer Amon. Yes, there's a very high chance that this would scare them. There must be other ploys or difficulties for this grandpa to choose to parasitize in such a shallow manner. He likely doesn't wish for me to flip the table. Heh, this matter is all thanks to Erodes. If he hadn't informed me ahead of time that Leonard has a marauder angel, I definitely wouldn't have noticed that I've been targeted, much less have the suitable excuse and method to warn them. Klein thought calmly and didn't show the anxiety or flustered state from before. As he relaxed, there was a knock on the door. His valet, Richardson, said, "Sir, the butler wishes to seek an audience with you. Please invite him in." Klein left the balcony and returned to the half-open room. The white-gloved Walter entered and said, "Sir, your philosophy teacher, Mr. Hamid, is here." Philosophy classes. Klein rubbed his aching temples. He had previously heard from Walter that Mr. Hamid was a believer of the Lord of Storms. It was the same for the famous scholar, Lumi, as well. Many of the philosophers in the Loen Kingdom shared the same faith. This made him rather surprised because, to him, believers in the storm were irascible bros. From the looks of it, I have to change my stereotypes and subjective impressions. The prerequisite to being a philosopher is to not have a wife, or not have a cordial relationship with their families? As Klein lampooned, he straightened his clothes and walked to the door. He said to butler Walter, "All right, I'll head over there now." After the philosophy class, Klein had a feeling as though he hadn't slept in 3 days. His mind was filled with names and concepts like skepticism, metaphysics, a priori and a posteriori, nominalism, Roselle socialism, existentialism, and positivism. If it wasn't because the original Klein had studied history, which included some mastery of philosophy, he doubted that he had the ability to last through the lesson. This wasn't his college lessons on Earth. They were one-to-one, making it impossible for him to sleep, daydream, or read novels on his cell phone when he didn't understand the content. Actually, Mr. Hamid was quite different from what I had imagined. He was humorous, candid, and extroverted. His lesson wasn't dull, making him unlike a philosophy teacher. He also doesn't possess the stereotypes of a Lord of Storms believer. Klein rubbed his temples, turned to leave, and walked to the staircase. He returned to the 3rd floor as his valet, Richardson, followed him in silence. During this process, he discovered that his servants were busy with their own duties. None of them were lazing about, and they would only stop when their employer walked past. They would bow and greet him, clearly indicating how well-mannered they were. Tanaja is very capable when it comes to the arrangement and management of household matters after all. Klein walked through the corridor on the 3rd floor and walked to the half-open room. Before he walked in, Klein saw butler Walter hanging 2 double-barreled hunting rifles on the wall, making the interior have a raw and bold feeling. This was a decoration every tycoon's home had. It's very easy to get approved for a hunting license. A double-barreled hunting rifle is potent, enough to allow the servants to fend off any criminals who wish to burgle or kidnap me. After hanging the rifle up, Walter took 2 steps back and observed the hunting rifle. He then took out a golden pocket watch from his inner pocket. He opened the pocket watch and looked at the lid's interior. His stern, old-fashioned face softened significantly. Klein coughed gently to inform his butler before pushing open the ajar door and walked in. Walter closed the pocket watch, returned to his spot, and bowed. "Sir, we applied for 6 hunting licenses and bought 6 double-barreled hunting rifles and the corresponding canister cartridges." Klein had death knell hiding under his armpit, so he didn't mind it too much. All he did was nod as a form of acknowledgement. He then revealed a warm smile and asked as though having a casual chat, "Back when I saw the information from the Family Servant Assistants Association, I noticed that you already have a wife and child?" A butler was the assistant to the employer. He was a confidant that knew many matters, therefore, establishing rapport with the butler was something every employer had to do. Klein didn't wish to be an exception. Furthermore, he remembered Erodes mentioning that butler Walter could result in additional developments. Walter answered in all seriousness, yes, back when I was a servant at the Viscount Conrad's manor, I had to have constant contact with a lady due to work. We began having feelings for each other, and under the goddess's watch, we walked down the aisle of marriage and ended up having a daughter. She's currently studying at a grammar school and wishes to pass the Backland University's entrance exams. However, that's something to consider only 2 years later. Upon mentioning his wife and daughter, this unsmiling butler's tone unknowingly turned mellow. At present, all the churches were emphasizing the importance of family. It was to stem the stress and mental problems that arose due to the tide of technological progress. The only difference was that different churches emphasized different matters. For Evernight, men and women were equal as they helped one another in the family. For Storm, men were to work outside while women were to handle the family, to be the former supportive angel. For Steam, it was more about learning more and to have technology do more of the work. All of them had their strengths, and they complemented each other. Klein felt wistful hearing that as he said, "Ma'am Tanaja seems to be single?" "Yes." Walter's expression turned solemn again. In modern society, male and female servants still do not enjoy equal treatment. I'm not referring to the salary, as a housekeeper is at the same level as a butler or butler assistant, earning £25 to £50 a year. Instead, I'm talking about a deeper idea and belief. The church is trying to change it, but there's plenty of resistance. After all, the goddess isn't the only belief in Loen. He paused and added, male servants can get married, but if a female servant were to have a family, it implies the loss of her job or becoming the lowest laundress who's only a part-time employee that doesn't need to live at the employer's residence. All of these will change only when one reaches the rank of housekeeper. But this isn't something a young and inexperienced lady is qualified for. Klein didn't continue on the topic as he nodded gently. He then walked towards the reclining chair. At this moment, his gaze swept by the piled newspaper by the coffee table. His mind stirred as he paused, turned to the side and said to his butler, I saw an advertisement on the papers regarding the sale of Backland Bike Company shares. Find a professional lawyer and accountant to inquire about it to figure out the exact situation. Heh, I'm rather interested in this industry. If the price is right, I'll consider buying it. For a second, Klein thought of a problem. As a tycoon who had brought huge sums of money to Backland to seek out better opportunities, it was impossible that he didn't pay attention to the sale of the Backland Bike Company shares. Since he didn't know the prospects of this industry, he needed to hire people to gain a better understanding of it, otherwise, it wouldn't fit his persona. Of course, I can also raise the price as a result, allowing me to sell those 10% shares at a higher price. Yes, I have to remember to just raise the price a little and not be too greedy. If I were to keep raising the price and it ends up back in my hands, I'll be crying. It would throw all my liquidity into it, and I won't be able to maintain my daily expenses. As Klein fantasized, he warned himself. Yes, sir. Walter didn't ask further as he directly agreed. At 4:35 p.m., Richardson knocked on the door and entered. He said to Dwayne Dantes, who was reading leisurely, Sir, Mr. Maury Mocked and his wife, Ma'am Rihanna, as well as St. Samuel Cathedral's Bishop Electra, is here to pay you a visit. Maury Mocked? That House of Commons Member of Parliament? Also, why would St. Samuel Cathedral's bishop be here as well? Klein thought and asked with a smile, is there such a protocol? He had only attended 2 etiquette lessons and knew that at his stage, visits wouldn't be that direct. People would first send their butlers or servants to hand over an invitation or schedule a visit. Richardson habitually lowered his head and said, yes. It's because Mr. Butler informed the neighbors that you would be home in the afternoon for the next week when he was delivering your name cards and gifts. Under such a situation, neighbors who received your name card and have heard about you will observe the corresponding details. Not only can they send their servants to invite you over, but they can also pass by on the excuse of being out on an afternoon stroll from 4 to 5 to make a semi-formal visit. Oh, the ladies will wear strolling attire, otherwise, it wouldn't be decent enough. And you can also invite them to have afternoon tea with you. Klein walked to the door and allowed Richardson to retrieve his coat to help him wear it. He then asked, then why would Bishop Electra be here as well? This was what he really cared about most. The first question was to lead up to it. Richardson answered as though he had prepared an answer. Bishop Electra was a guest at Member of Parliament Mock's house in the afternoon. They must have mentioned you while having a chat and decided to pay a visit by strolling over. His hands weren't affected by his talking. He skillfully helped Dwayne Dantes adjust his attire. Klein tersely acknowledged, and after Richardson went forward to open the door, he walked out. Soon, he saw the three visitors in a small living room on the second floor. Maury Mocht was a classic Loenese gentleman. He was in his 40s, and he had black hair and brown eyes. He had a deep outline with a receding hairline. His face was a little thin and long. He was formerly in the military and had entered politics after being discharged. He started his career in Backland until he became a member of Parliament of the Kingdom's House of Commons. He was a believer of the Evernight Goddess and a member of the New Party. He was in support of improving the environment. His wife, Rihanna, was from a family of lawyers. She provided plenty of funding for her husband's political ambitions, and she was also a believer of the Evernight Goddess. Electra wore a black, double-breasted clergyman's robe. He looked to be 40, and he had deep, blue eyes and a thin face. He wasn't good-looking, but for some baffling reason, he was pleasing to the eyes. Klein had once met this bishop when he was donating money into the donation box. Upon seeing Dwayne Dantes appear, Maury Mocht took 2 steps forward and chuckled. I've been hearing for the past few days that a pious believer in the goddess had moved into Unit 160, and I've been wanting to visit. We happened to be taking a stroll today, and we took the liberty to visit. Please pardon us for our faux pas. Klein smiled and tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion. At such times, the only thing we need to do is praise the lady. Praise the lady. Electra and Rihanna nodded as they drew a crimson moon on their chests. After exchanging pleasantries, Klein invited his 3 guests to take a seat. A maid hurriedly delivered some tea and coffee. Housekeeper Tanaja had already asked each one of them what they wanted prior. Mr. Dantes, I heard you're a merchant from Desi. I wonder what business you were previously engaged in. Maury Mocht asked casually before joking. Your last name just makes me think of many things. He was referring to the protagonist's name of a particular best-selling novel written by Emperor Roselle. Klein smiled and humorously asked in return, what kind of business does digging up treasure count as? This was also related to the content of said best-selling novel. Without waiting for the Member of Parliament to answer him, he said the answer he had long fabricated, I once had my own mine, but as you know, it will one day be mined out. Mining cities would also end up waning as a result. He was hinting that he was born in one of the resource-rich cities in Desi County. There, gangs were rampant, and there were many secret tycoons. If ordinary people were to attempt to investigate Dwayne Dantes' situation, it would take them at least half a year. Bishop Electra nodded in thought as he asked, so, you chose to come to Backland to seek out new opportunities? May I know who proselytized you into the church? Klein had already walked through Bishop Electra's last question before, so he said with a sigh, it was my father. He was a truly wise elder. Unfortunately, he passed away many years ago during an accident. When he said that, he infused the original Klein's emotions of losing his parents, him being in an alternate world with no home to return to, as well as the scars that resulted from his time in Tingen City. He sounded calm and wore a slight smile, but there was a sorrow that lasted forever that remained hidden deep inside. I'm sorry for your loss. He must have entered the holy residence of the goddess, sleeping peacefully under her watch, Bishop Electra answered sincerely as he formed the sign of the crimson moon on his chest. Without waiting for Dwayne Dantes to respond, he looked at him and invited him. There will be a moon mass the day after tomorrow for the deceased. It will help him sleep in the goddess's nation and receive eternal peace. I wonder if you're interested in participating? The Church of the Evernight Goddess didn't have many festivals, and the most important one was Winter Gifts Day. The second most important was the Mass held during the full moon, also known as the Moon Massachusetts. The rest were just normal masses and prayers on weekends. However, different dioceses and different cathedrals had their own patron saints and angels which would have a corresponding special festival for them. I would love to. Klein stood up and bowed, saying it from the bottom of his heart. This gave him the perfect excuse to interact with the bishops and priests of St. Samuel Cathedral, or even the diocese bishop. He had a firm foundation for entering particular regions in the cathedral. Meanwhile, he came to realize why the Evernight pathway was interchangeable with the Death pathway. Both wielded the authorities of serenity, eternal sleep, and darkness. It represented the end and a destination. Following that, Mori mocked didn't continue the topic regarding Dwayne Dantes' identity and background. It appeared as though he had only been asking in passing. He and his wife, Rihanna, began idly talking about their vacation experience in Desi Bay last year. Having filled the gaps on this by staying there for 2 days, Klein replied with a native tone as he shared his thoughts on the Desi specialty, roasted fish. During this process, he also pretended to unintentionally mention his hunting activities while he was doing business in West Balam, and how he was extremely familiar with the primitive forest over there. This was to build up the necessary foundations for the second layer to Dwayne Dantes' identity. Furthermore, West Balam was different from East Balam. The colonial factions from Loen and Intis were on par, allowing for frequent conflicts. Even the actively controlled regions would experience changes from time to time. To investigate the activity trajectories of a merchant or adventurer wasn't easy at all. This was even more so the case when Dwayne Dantes was likely using a fake name. As for his hunting experience in West Balam's primitive forest, Klein didn't randomly fabricate stories, nor did he plagiarize articles from the magazines or newspapers. He used what the Fog Sea's strongest hunter, Anderson, had previously mentioned regarding his glorious deeds as a blueprint. He drew on the details and abandoned the main storyline. What he fabricated was partially true and fake as well. Upon hearing the thick anacondas, man-eating fishes, and flowers which could capture their own prey in the forests, Rihanna would let out gasps from time to time, looking afraid but also eager to know more. As for the Member of Parliament and Bishop, they were equally interested. They often had to force themselves to interrupt Dwayne Dantes' description to ask about the details. "You really are an excellent hunter. Back when I was serving in East Balam, I never had the chance to enter the forest. I never expected it to be this dangerous." After this extremely dignified middle-aged gentleman finished his tales, Mori mocked, picked up a tiny piece of velvet cake and praised sincerely. "I wish to invite you to go hunting if there's a chance in the future." As they conversed, a maid had delivered the afternoon tea pastries. A male servant served them from the side. Upon hearing Member of Parliament mock's semi-serious invitation, Klein replied with a smile, "I'm already looking forward to it." After chatting a little more and discussing Backlund's pollution control, the 3 guests suggested they take their leave. As they had only acquainted themselves and weren't considered familiar with each other, Klein didn't retain them. He sent them to the door with his valet, Richardson. As he watched the bishop, Member of Parliament and his wife leave, Klein's smile slowly disappeared until there was nothing left. He was rather pleased with the progress he had made. Bishop Electra was directly related to the Church of the Evernight Goddess, which was the main goal for him to return to Backlund. Mori mocked was a discharged soldier and a Member of Parliament at present. Without a doubt, he belonged to certain military officer clubs, and he would be beneficial to his continued investigation of the Great Smog of Backlund. Next up, I should slowly deepen our relationships. Klein returned to the small living room and saw that the maid had taken away the remaining pastries and tea. He originally planned on having a little more. Regardless of the other types of food, the pastries and desserts in Loen, especially Backlund, were outstanding. As for the cook which Dwayne Dantes had hired, he was skilled in that. Even Mamriana was filled with praise about it. Klein also agreed from the bottom of his heart. Retracting his gaze, Klein didn't say a word as he steadily walked to the staircase that led to the 3rd floor. Before dinner, Butler Walter finally returned to the house and briefed him on the situation regarding the 10% of Backlund Bike Company's shares. "Sir, we are lucky enough. Someone had hired a professional lawyer and accountant to investigate the situation of the Backland Bike Company, and they had offered a price to the seller before the advertisements were published. But in subsequent negotiations, the price exceeded the buyer's expectations. He had no choice but to give up. This way, we don't have to wait for the investigation report. We can directly hire that original team. Klein nodded and asked without hiding anything, "What's the current bid?" The buyer that gave up had offered £6,000 with a bottom-line price of £7,000. The seller didn't divulge the situation about the other buyer, however, from the feedback from various channels, it's at least £8,000. £8,000. Not too bad. Should I raise it a little more? If I were to raise the price a little and the other party just gives up, wouldn't it be awkward? Klein nodded slightly and said, "Give me the corresponding report. I'll consider it." After flipping through the report and having dinner to accentuate his extravagant but brilliant image as someone who did solid work, Klein turned his head to Richardson and said, "Prepare the two-wheel carriage. I'll be making a trip outside." He originally imagined that Richardson would ask him in surprise. A two-wheeled carriage didn't seem befitting enough, but to his surprise, his valet answered politely after flashing a curious look, "All right, sir." Submissive and never asking why. That's also considered an advantage. Klein sighed inwardly as he waited for Richardson to return to help him wear his coat. After getting on the two-wheeled carriage, he directly instructed, "Let's circle around the Backland Bridge area and East Borough." Richardson still didn't ask about his master's motives and just got the coachman to steer the horses carefully. As the carriage passed through Sherwood Borough, it arrived in the Backland Bridge area under the illumination of the street lamps. Klein didn't give a destination, and he only got the coachman to meander through the nearby streets. He leaned against the carriage wall, looking out at the streets. He saw pedestrians in old clothes, walking along with tired faces as though they were in a rush to return home for dinner after a hard day's work. Occasionally, there would be the ringing of a bike passing by. They were fast as they shot into the distance. In comparison, the rider's expression appeared more lively than the pedestrians. They seemed to beam with an indescribable sense of pride. It's an obvious difference in class. Although it's the difference between a technical worker and an ordinary worker, with the difference in weekly salaries of £1 to £2 to those with £1 a week. Klein slowly exhaled as he subconsciously looked up at the sky. At that moment, darkness had already completely covered Backland's skies, but the smog wasn't too serious. One could see through them and see the twinkling stars. After the Great Smog, the management of the environment is improving by the day. However, the situation with the lower-class workers in the East Borough hasn't significantly improved. Although their salaries might be higher, and their working hours have improved, due to the large number of people surging in, prices have risen across the board, reducing the effects of the salary hike. The improvement in working hours have just gone from 15 to 16 hours to 11 to 12 hours. They're just fixing the problems with the greatest problems. As for the other problems that didn't rear their ugly heads, they're neglected. Yes, the kingdom is still undergoing reforms. Many things haven't been straightened out. Klein watched as his thoughts drifted until the carriage left Sherwood Borough. On the future, Admiral of Stars Cattleya stood behind the windows in the captain's cabin, watching frankly pushing wooden barrels into the shadows. He was putting unknown things into it before closing the lid. He's recently been researching the growth of plants in dark environments. Why did he suddenly become normal? Cattleya frowned with suspicion, often worrying that Frank Lee would create some huge invention. I'll get Nina to ask later. Just as she had this thought, her spiritual perception was triggered. She turned her head to see a letter on her desk. As a faint smile curled on her lips without her realizing it, Cattleya walked over, tore open the envelope, and unfolded the letter. She quickly read through it. There are 2 Obninsks that do not belong to the Church of Storms swimming north from Sonia Island towards the Abyss Maelstrom. Find the direct descendant of Abraham family. You did well. Abyss Maelstrom was the name of a dangerous area at sea, and not the abyss. Abraham family. Cattleya thought for a moment, and without any clues, she planned on asking at the next tarot gathering. The next morning, after divining again if he should raise the price again, Klein said to Butler Walter, "Hire that team and continue the negotiation. My bottom line is £9,000. All right, sir." Walter then immediately said with an apologetic look, "Something happened at home, and I wish to have half a day off." "No problem. Do you need any help?" Klein asked gently. "Thank you for asking. I can handle it, and it's not too urgent. I will first handle the matters regarding the share negotiation first," Walter said sincerely. Klein didn't ask further as he nodded and permitted him to take time off. After his butler left the room, Klein turned to look at Richardson and asked, "Did Walter meet anyone earlier this morning?" "Mr. Butler received a letter," Richardson replied without hiding anything. "He received a letter? Didn't he say that something happened at home?" "Walter's family lives in Backland, so if there really is anything wrong, then they can directly come over via public carriage or a rental carriage. Wouldn't that be faster than sending a message by mail? With his salary and land in the countryside, he can definitely afford it." Klein nodded without a word as though he had just asked in passing. He slowly returned to the reclining chair, sat down, and began to seriously read the papers. Upon seeing this, Richardson didn't say a thing as he silently retreated out of the room and quietly closed the wooden door. After hearing the light click, Klein cast his gaze away from the papers and towards the door. He thought, "I've discovered another advantage of Richardson. He enjoys observing his surroundings, and he's able to notice information of value. Back when Bishop Electra was a guest at Member of Parliament Maury Mock's place, he was the first one to notice it from the balcony. However, this is different from a spectator. The focus is more on the event rather than the details. Walter's matter seems a little abnormal. Could this be the additional development Rhodes mentioned? Regardless, I'll first divine the matter. I don't want danger to come to me without me realizing it." With this in mind, Klein immediately entered the bathroom, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and arrived above the gray fog. Every time he appeared as the fool, his inner shell beneath the gray fog would wear Klein Moretti's appearance. It wouldn't overlap with Sherlock Moriarty, Gehrman Sparrow, or Dwayne Dantes. Due to the lack of necessary information, he could only divine about any danger that targeted himself, therefore, he didn't use dream divination. He removed the spirit pendulum around his wrist and wrote the corresponding divination statement, "Walter's abnormality will bring me danger." Holding the spirit pendulum in his left hand, Klein closed his eyes and entered cogitation as he muttered the sentence he had just said. After repeating it 7 times, he opened his eyes and saw the topaz spinning counterclockwise at a rather ordinary speed and amplitude. This also meant that Walter's abnormality wouldn't bring him any danger. But this can only mean that I might not encounter any dangerous trouble through this problem. In addition, there's also another possibility. The danger depends on whether I make the appropriate choice. If I were to rashly get myself involved, something that isn't dangerous might become dangerous. Klein interpreted the matter with his rich experience. Just as he put this matter on hold, he suddenly saw the crimson star that represented the hermit coruscate as it burgeoned and shrank. Does this mean that the payment for scales of luck is here? Klein was delighted as he immediately emanated his spirituality. He was left disappointed because Katlia was only requesting Mr. Fool to pass on a message to the hanged man. She didn't mention when she would close the deal with the world. There are Obnensks at the Abyss Maelstrom north of Sonia Island? Mr. Hanged Man is pretty lucky. At least he isn't like me, needing to enter the ruins of the battlefield of gods. Of course, Obnensks can be dangerous as well. It's not easy to use one for a ritual. Mr. Hanged Man might even need see God's help. Ma'am Hermit's request is actually to help find the direct descendants of the Abraham family. This means that Queen Mystic is rather aware of Mr. Door's origins. The Emperor had mentioned it to her? Klein began making connections from Katlia's words as he threw the corresponding image to the crimson star representing the Hanged Man. At this moment, Alger Wilson had just finished his reports and had passed the examination, allowing him to return to the Blue Avenger. When he saw the endless gray fog and heard the hermit's words, he walked to the captain's cabin with a deadpan expression, keeping his pace normal. Upon entering the room and closing the door, he came in front of an alcohol cabinet, took a bottle of Lanty Proof, the most beloved drink of pirates, and poured half a cup. Alger immediately held the cup to his mouth and downed it like it was water. During this process, he kept his eyes half closed as though he was completely immersed in his own world. After drinking half a cup of Lanty Proof, Alger put down the cup, wiped his mouth, and chuckled. Abraham family's direct descendant? This might be very difficult for others, with almost zero clues, but I can ask Miss Magician. Her teacher is one. Heh, Admiral of Stars still isn't aware of it yet. He quickly reined in his emotions and paced about, finally giving up on his idea and responded frankly to Catlia's request. Admiral of Stars won't only ask for my help. At the tarot gathering next week, she might announce this mission to everyone, and the others know that Miss Magician's teacher is a member of the Abraham family. There's no point lying about matters that can be easily exposed. I shouldn't jeopardize the possible transactions in the future just for some petty gains. At times, honesty is the best policy. Alger stopped walking as he reverently bowed his head and recited Mr. Fool's honorific name. Please inform Ma'am Hermit that she can directly ask Miss Magician for clues regarding the direct descendants of the Abraham family. After settling the request by Admiral of Stars, Alger took the initiative to mention his encounter during the night of the blood moon, and he inquired to Mr. Fool about whether the item that resonated with the ocean songster's beyonder characteristic was the Book of Calamity, and if the female holding the golden cup in the Coral Palace was Kohainam. Something like that happened? Queen of Calamity might really not be completely dead. It's likely that she had split her beyonder characteristic, splitting them into the Book of Calamity and the one in the undersea ruin. Yes, there might even be a third or fourth portion, but I've no idea where they are. Klein confirmed without any hesitation that the elf was Queen of Calamity Kohainam. This wasn't based on intuition, but a logical inference. He had once obtained the golden cup that elf Queen Kohainam loved, and a similar vessel had appeared in the dream. Elvish songster Ciadas knew of Queen of Calamity's daily trivialities, and she had quite a strong relationship with the angel, which strongly implied that she was an elf that attended to Kohainam. It was completely understandable that the beyonder characteristic she left behind resonated with the Book of Calamity on the night of the blood moon. With this in mind, Klein suddenly recalled a matter. He had given Kohainam's beloved golden cup to Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina for her to bury in Ciadas's tomb. If Queen of Calamity really isn't completely dead, will the golden cup cause any form of mutation to the corpses of any elves close to her? Klein did a count of the time, and he discovered that he couldn't be certain if the golden dream had reached Sonia Island. After some thought, he calmly replied to the hanged man, "That's right." Following that, he forwarded the message to the Crimson Star representing the Hermit. After doing all of this, Klein conjured the world Gehrman Sparrow and made him pray. Honorable Mr. Fool, please tell Danitz to pass on a message to Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina Edwards about the existence of any abnormalities between elvish songster Ciadas's corpse and the golden cup. Phew. After doing all of that, Klein exhaled and threw the corresponding image to the specially labeled point of light beside him. He then returned to the real world and left the bathroom. Coming before his changing mirror, he looked at his gray sideburns and blue eyes as he curled up the corners of his lips. He knew that he had returned from being Mr. Fool to the mysterious merchant, Dwayne Dantes. Biome inside a primitive forest. Danitz, who was having a feast in a particular base of the resistance, suddenly trembled as he nearly choked on the liquid in his mouth. Although this wasn't the first time he was receiving an answer from the mighty Fool, he still felt apprehensive and afraid. After he identified the figure and heard his words, he heaved a sigh of relief and knew that Gehrman Sparrow was getting him to do something. Ask Captain? That's simple. The Golden Dream will be picking me up in a few days. Gehrman Sparrow isn't crazy, and he's even very sincere and reverent before the mighty Fool. Danitz quickly relaxed as he leisurely thought. Meanwhile on the future, Catlia, who had received a response that surprised her, muttered in silence, "Directly ask Miss Magician?" Yes, she seems to be a beyonder of the apprentice pathway. she's actually related to the Abraham family? As I expected, she's not simple. Katlia considered a moment and decided if she ought to give the hanged man a new mission because she wasn't too sure if Miss Magician was willing to divulge clues to the Abraham family. Walter returned to 160 Buckland Street in the afternoon with a normal expression like before. He had apparently resolved everything easily. Klein didn't ask. He felt that their relationship hadn't reached a point in which his butler could be totally frank with him. Furthermore, the problem hadn't fully blown up before him in a way that couldn't be hidden. Time quickly passed as he had his lessons. The next evening, with the arrival of the full moon, Klein brought along Richardson and rode his high-end carriage to St. Samuel Cathedral for the moon mass. He wasn't worried about the donation that would happen, because Miss Justice had paid him £1,000. He now had £2,186, so it wasn't too difficult for him to donate a few £100. It's only not too difficult. Klein sighed inwardly as he looked at the bell tower outside, left the carriage, walked across the square, and stepped into St. Samuel Cathedral. After waiting nearly 10 minutes outside the prayer hall, Klein and the other believers who were here to join the moon mass entered under the priest's lead. In the dark and serene atmosphere, they heard uniform and ethereal chanting. Full-faced above the land stood the crimson moon. And sweet it was to dream of themselves. Of child, and wife, and parents, but evermore. Holy and rhythmic voices echoed in the prayer hall as the believers involuntarily quietened down, as though they had forgotten all their frustrations in life or the different challenges they faced in the real world. Under the guidance of a few priests, they found their seats. In front of the altar, Bishop Electra, who was in charge of celebrating the Mass, held the revelation of Evernight and began preaching. As this segment came to an end, the priests held up water and bread, and they began handing them out to Klein and company. This was the loving grace of Evernight, food that people both alive and dead could share. Having not had dinner, Klein naturally didn't waste the bread of average quality and the water in the cup. Then, he saw candles light up on the altar, and under the darkness, they appeared like stars in the night sky, emitting light and warmth that eased one's heart. At that moment, Bishop Electra led the few priests and everyone in the choir to chant in unison. We look upward into the night sky. We tenderly say her name, Evernight Goddess. We know no other words, except Evernight Goddess. May the goddess draw out from the angel chorus. With the silent sweet to gather. And hold both within her right hand which is gentle. Goddess. If she heard us, she would surely agree. Smiling with purity at the dead. Come, rest and sleep well, my children. The empty voice filled with holiness drilled into every believer's ears. It felt as though all the spirits present were resonating in unison. As a sequence 5 beyonder, Klein felt as though his soul body was being cleansed as his spirituality naturally flowed out in comfort. Following that, a tranquil darkness seemed to appear before his eyes, a darkness without any sound. In the darkness, corpses lay there, their faces calm and at peace, as though they weren't dead and were actually in a deep sleep. Klein calmly traversed the darkness in a staid manner when he suddenly stopped and looked diagonally ahead. At a spot where moonflowers were silently blooming, there were a few people sleeping. They were the hatless Dunn Smith in a trench coat, old Neil, who still wore his black classic robe, and the short Kenley, who worked hard to save up money. They closed their eyes in a relaxed manner as a faint smile appeared to show on their lips. Around them were erected tombs, each of them having the same word written on them, Guardian. Klein instantly closed his eyes as a holy and ethereal voice resounded by his ears. Cross your hands humbly. Over your breast. Make the silent prayer. And shout from the bottom of your heart. The only escape is tranquility. Klein lowered his head, closed his eyes, and raised his hands up before crossing them before his chest. He then repeated silently, the only escape is tranquility. The only escape is tranquility. This repeated again and again until the prayer hall reached a state of extreme silence. Only then did Klein open his eyes again and rubbed the corners of his eyes. He slowly exhaled and glanced around him. With the light from the candles, he discovered that most of the believers were covered in tears without realizing it. Even his valet, Richardson, was constantly tearing up without wiping his tears. The moon mass is akin to a ritual with beyonder powers involved. Its effect is likely to make everyone's spirit resonate, allowing different people to see the deceased who they share deep relationships in the darkness. It relieves one's grief in order to obtain tranquility. Yes, this isn't an abnormality that's targeted at beyonders, so I can be at ease. To ordinary people, this might be an illusory outlet that's instantaneous. They would only believe that it's a result of the goddess's greatness, and not some extraordinary powers. Sequence 5 Beyonders of the Evernight pathway seemed to gain a significant enhancement in their control of spirits. Klein withdrew his gaze as he made a judgment. Right on the heels of that, he recalled the darkness and the deceased that lay amidst the moon flowers. Closing his eyes, Klein allowed his thoughts to drift. That dark plain filled with moon flowers, night vanilla, and slumber flowers is a manifestation of the goddess's divine kingdom? What does the source of danger in the night time inside that battle of the gods' ruin correspond to then? Klein gradually outlined the cold darkness and the fog that enveloped the sea on the eastern front of the Sonia Sea. In the fog, there was an ancient, pitch-black cathedral with a steeple. Ravens spiraled above it as though they were holding a memorial or were in grief. And around the cathedral were ordinary residents, simple wood huts, grayish-white mills, and indistinct figures. Logically speaking, this foggy scene that's intricately tied to the night and dreams should be formed from the aura left behind when the goddess slayed Annihilation demonic wolf. But it doesn't have any similarities with the corresponding divine kingdom. Yes, mortals can't pry into the secrets of deities, so perhaps the dark plains filled with flowers isn't the projection of the divine kingdom, but rather an outcome of the ritual. Seeing that the moon mass was coming to an end, Klein reached into his inner pocket and took out his wallet. Holding his wallet, he got up and entered the aisle, walked straight to the altar, and under Bishop Electra's compassionate watch, he walked diagonally over to the donation box. He tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion, drawing out the crimson moon before throwing in all his large denomination notes. A total of £300. At that moment, Klein didn't feel the pinch like the previous few times. He was in a very calm mood because he recalled the ritual old Neil had used to repay his debt. Back then, they picked up a wallet containing £300, all thanks to the goddess's blessings. Taking a step back, he drew the crimson moon once again, and he gave his spot to the donor behind him. At that moment, Bishop Electra walked over and said as he drew the crimson moon, "May the goddess bless you. May the goddess know about it." "What I wish for now is to receive some teachings," Klein replied with a smile. Bishop Electra glanced at the prayer hall side door and said, "If you don't mind waiting 15 minutes, I can explain the Bible to you in the library." "I would love that," Klein said with a warm smile. Bishop Electra immediately got a priest to lead Dwayne Dantes and a servant out the prayer hall through a side door as they circled around a spiral staircase to the nearby library. There was a huge bookshelf here, and on it were various books from the Church of the Evernight Goddess. There were tables and chairs lining the sides for priests and bishops to study and preach to the believers. 12 minutes later, Bishop Electra entered the library with a calming smile and saw Dwayne Dantes with his white sideburns standing in front of a bookshelf, flipping through a book with great focus. He exuded the vibes of a scholar. "What are you reading?" he asked with a smile. Klein snapped the book together and said with a self-deprecating smile, "The Revelation of Evernight." To be frank, although I'm a pious believer of the goddess, I've never had the time to seriously sit down and read the Bible due to my busy life. As he spoke, he didn't show any odd signs on his face, but he felt uneasy deep down. He was afraid the goddess would smite him with a bolt of lightning to reward this pious believer, Dwayne Dantes. Well, lightning isn't in the goddess's domain. Klein consoled himself. Bishop Electra smiled and took the Revelation of Evernight from his hands. "It's never too late to begin." Following that, he invited Dwayne Dantes to sit down beside a table and systematically introduced the Revelation of Evernight's structure and the corresponding holy word. Richardson held his employer's hat and cane, and he stood a slight distance away, silently waiting to listen to the bishop's preachings. Time ticked by, when Klein, who appeared serious, suddenly felt his spiritual perception trigger. A scene outside the door naturally surfaced in his mind. This was an intuitive foresight that stemmed from a clown, one that had been enhanced by the gray fog. Outside the door, an elder dressed in a black clergyman robe walked by and headed for the nearby spiral staircase. He had lush white hair but didn't comb it, making him look rather disheveled. He had a thin face that made it appear as though he was bones wrapped in skin. He exuded a rather cold bearing, and his skin was abnormally pale. His eyes were a rare pure black. This figure quickly vanished from the door as the footsteps gradually sounded like they were coming from above. A keeper. But it's not the one I met at the prayer hall. It's his turn today? Klein paid attention to Bishop Electra as he wore a contemplative look over the Bible's contents. He wasn't surprised that a keeper would appear inside the cathedral and pass by the library at this time. This was because the sealing forces behind Cheney's gate would reach its peak at night. It wasn't suitable for living creatures to remain inside, therefore, the keepers only entered at sunrise and left at sunset. It had just turned dark. I need to remember what day and date it is today. Later, with more information, I'll be able to figure out the keeper's rotation schedule. This way, I'll be able to act as the corresponding target at the right time. Klein reined in his thoughts as he listened attentively. Finally, he got up and bade farewell 30 minutes later. He smiled and said to Bishop Electra, "I'm wondering if I have the honor to listen to your preachings in the future." "No problem." Faced with a tycoon who had just donated £300, Bishop Electra couldn't reject him. He even happily nodded. "As long as you come to the cathedral and I have the time." Klein didn't harp on the details to prevent any suspicion. He earnestly thanked him and left St. Samuel Cathedral with Richardson. He returned home before 8, and enjoyed dinner as he leisurely spent the rest of his night. Late at night, inside the master bedroom, the sleeping Klein suddenly opened his eyes. His spiritual intuition told him that someone had infiltrated his mansion, adapted from The Lotus Eaters by Tennyson, adapted from The Cry of the Children by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, adapted from The Bridge of Sighs by Thomas Hood and Lotus Eaters by Tennyson. Someone has infiltrated the compound? Klein didn't immediately sit up. All he did was turn his body to the side and reached his left palm under his pillow. He secretly held death knell, and at the same time, he slowly spread his left hand open, preparing to activate creeping hunger. After knowing that it was difficult to find food for creeping hunger in Backland, he had infiltrated the prisons in Desi Bay's Conant City, found an inmate on death row, and confirmed that there wasn't any mistake in the judgment before feeding him to the glove. The Rose school of thought has locked onto me? No, it's impossible for them to be that quick. Besides, if it's them, they wouldn't just come but would wait for an opportunity. They will seize the opportunity when I'm passing by a secluded spot and strike so as to not alarm Backland's official organizations. I donated too much money at the Moon Mass, causing criminals to target me? A generous tycoon who just came to Backland from a foreign land is indeed an easy target. Of course, I can't rule out the routine investigations of the Nighthawks. As thoughts flashed through his mind, Klein heard a soft noise coming from the balcony in the adjoining half-open room. Right on the heels of that, there was the sound of a lock turning as the floor-to-ceiling window was pulled open nearly silently. Klein carefully listened and sensed the footsteps pass through the half-open room and into the corridor. After a pause, the footsteps walked towards the master bedroom before passing it, turning the doorknob to his valet's room. He went into the wrong room? Or could it be that he's here to find Richardson? Klein's heart stirred as he released his grip on death knell. He then reached out to the iron cigar case, which wasn't too far. After he removed the wall of spirituality, an illusory figure in a dark red coat and old triangular hat appeared beside him. It then walked into the full-body mirror. When Senor, the Wraith marionette, jumped to the glass window in Richardson's room, he saw a figure with orange-yellow skin, raven-black hair, and soft facial features walk out of the room. As for Richardson, he was silently sitting by the edge of his bed, his body leaning forward. His back was hunched up like he was fused into the darkness. Horror colored his face as he showed a weak and stumped expression. Finally, he fell silent. The person is indeed here for Richardson. His traits resemble that of someone from the southern continent. He's agile and skilled. He's likely not an ordinary person. This is a friend that Richardson got to know at the manor in the southern continent, or could it be a maternal relative? Richardson is only a valet with an annual salary of £35. What matter would need his help? Klein guessed as he used Signor's vision to observe. At that moment, he suddenly realized why Richardson was good at observation and often stayed in the balcony to size up any pedestrians. He was afraid of being found. I hope it's not too big a problem and won't affect my plans. I'll later divine the matter. If Richardson is unable to resolve the problem, I'll have to find an excuse to terminate his services. Seeing his valet lie back down, Klein pulled back his wraith marionette. Meanwhile, Leonard Mitchell, who lived at 7 Pinster Street, once again entered the fog-immersed backland. He had previously questioned the Daily Observer reporter, Mike Joseph, and received the news that Sherlock Moriarty didn't proactively involve himself in Leonidas' matter. Instead, he participated in a discussion after being hired. This made any suspicions regarding him drop drastically. If it wasn't because this detective had been slightly involved in Capham's matter, and how he had a close relationship with Emlyn White from the Harvest Church, Leonard Mitchell would have had thoughts of giving up the investigation to continue his search for Nsangwil. As Sherlock Moriarty didn't have many friends at the Quelag Club, with one of them dying in the matter involving Prince Edisac while the other was reporter Mike Joseph, therefore, Leonard only had one target left, Dr. Aaron Series. From the dossiers, this doctor was once involved in a beyonder matter of the monster pathway. After the item was swapped, he stopped being unlucky or having nightmares. His life returned back on track. Most people that Sherlock Moriarty know are involved in beyonder matters. This detective sure isn't an ordinary someone. As Leonard thought, he rang the doorbell in Aaron Series' dream. Upon entering the dream, he casually found a sofa to sit in and said to Dr. Aaron, who was opposite him, "Tell me in detail how you got to know Sherlock Moriarty." In the dream, Aaron didn't lie. He started from how Mrs. Mary had introduced Sherlock Moriarty into the Quelag Club, and how he was one of the recommenders. He continued until the detective suggested that he inform the Church of the Evernight Goddess's bishop about his abnormal matters. The truth is described in the dossiers. Sherlock Moriarty seems rather friendly towards the official Beyonder organizations, and he was endorsed by Isengard Stanton. Leonard glanced at the mustached Sherlock, which Dr. Aaron conjured, and retracted his gaze as he listened attentively. After Aaron finished recounting everything in detail, he said, "He headed to the south for a vacation, and he hasn't returned. I've been worried about him all this while. However, he's a detective filled with wisdom and a kind heart. I believe nothing bad will happen to him. I just wish that he can participate in the celebration of my child's birth." Perhaps? Leonard suspected that Sherlock Moriarty might never return to Backland. He then politely bade farewell and walked out of Dr. Aaron's dream. After taking a few steps forward, he subconsciously looked back and saw that inside the house with a garden, blurry spherical lights that represented different dreams filled the entire space. Everything was fine. Was it a mistake on my part? I keep feeling as though something about me is changing. Leonard muttered as he turned to fly to Pinster Street. Everywhere he could see was covered in dense fog. The street lamps were gloomy and pale. Suddenly, Leonard stopped flying as he cast his gaze at a building. In that house, there were about 5 spherical lights floating in silence, making it look different from the other buildings. However, Leonard's spiritual perception told him that there was apparently a black blob in the house which could absorb all light. Furthermore, he discovered that he didn't recognize the street he was at. He felt alarmed, suspecting if he had seen something he shouldn't see. He hurriedly retracted his gaze as he prepared to leave and head for his residence. At that moment, the building that looked ordinary sounded with a teasing voice. "Why don't you come in for a cup of tea?" Thoughts erupted in Leonard's mind as he flew up at high speeds without even thinking. In his spiritual perception, the terrace houses lining the back, the garden, and tiny buildings were burgeoning in size as the windows and doors turned into mouths that were biting at him. The nearby black street lamps were extending in height, making the surroundings appear like a forest of steel that seemed to stop Leonard. Leonard didn't stop or turn back. He felt a chill down his back as it became more obvious and deeper. His body slowly stiffened as though he was being grabbed by countless invisible hands. Just as he felt that he couldn't hold out any longer, he saw a familiar house where a familiar window and light stood. He held his breath, plunged down abruptly, and fell back into his dream. Phew! He jolted awake and found himself drenched in cold sweat. Old man, what did I actually encounter? Leonard retracted his legs from the desk's edge and asked with a sense of lingering fear. The slightly aged voice in his mind replied. After a few seconds, I'm not sure. Leonard's eyelid drooped immediately as he didn't pursue the matter. He then cast his gaze out the window and saw lights everywhere in the backland night sky. It was tranquil. 160 Buckland Street. Inside Dwayne Dantes' mansion. Sir, Ma'am Wiana Heisen is here, Richardson entered the room and said to Klein. Klein put down his papers and looked up, glancing at his valet. He discovered that he was still an apprehensive man of few words, silent and reserved. There was nothing odd with him. If it wasn't because the divination outcome was okay. Suddenly firing an employee will incur suspicion. Klein silently mumbled. He stood up as though nothing had happened, and he got Richardson to help him wear his coat. 15 minutes later, he was holding his etiquette teacher, Wiana Heisen, in an embrace as he began to learn another common dance used at social events. I feel as though I'll be losing my job in a few days. After a while, Wiana praised Dwayne Dantes for his progress. When she was done, she added, however, you're still a little restrained. Although you don't have to act like intus men who cling closely to the ladies, you don't have to constantly maintain a distance. It's very normal to make occasional contact. The way you are behaving now makes you appear rigid and dull. Klein pulled her in a little and replied with a smile, I was afraid of being rude. Does this mean that being too close to ladies is an act of rudeness? It also implies I'm full of charm, and that he might embarrass himself if he's too close. This is quite a euphemistic form of praise. Wiana thought and said with a smile, you have learned well. The dance continued as Klein looked at Wiana Heisen's face as he asked warmly in a casual manner, Ma'am, you seem frustrated? Wiana lowered her head and chuckled. It's nothing serious. My husband is a businessman, and he recently had some minor conflicts with some people. We can resolve the matter. Oh, your question was too direct. Before both parties have established a friendship, it's best not to ask about their matters, unless she has made it obvious. Compared to you who comes and goes in families of high society, thus, knowing many madams and ladies, as a tycoon who just arrived in Backland, I do lack the necessary social connections. Klein nodded gently and said with a smile, I thought we were no longer strangers. He then skipped the topic and began talking about his own experiences and his neighbors. Wiana would mention a few things in response, allowing Klein to better grasp the traits and preferences of his neighbor. After Wiana left, Klein stood at the door for some time before turning to say to his butler, Walter, find out what trouble Ma'am Wiana is facing. If she can't resolve it, we will provide her with some timely assistance. 758 efforts will ultimately pay off plus, turn off reset. In the evening, Klein, who had just returned from St. Samuel Cathedral, was just about to enter the dining hall on the second floor when he saw butler Walter walk over and say with a polite bow, Sir, the matter you wished to be investigated has been completed. Klein didn't inquire further in front of the other servants as he staidly nodded. Let's talk in the study. Walter followed behind him and came all the way to the third floor. Richardson then opened the door and lit the gas wall lamp inside. Klein unhurriedly walked to his desk, sat down, and looked at the butler for the report. As Walter gestured Richardson to guard outside the door, he approached the desk and deliberated over his words. After the door closed again, he said, Ma'am Wahana's husband is a cloth merchant. He had been cooperating with someone and had invested £1,000 into it, but the other party ran off with the goods. She has already sought the help of Member of Parliament Mocht and Ma'am Rihanna to urge the police department to crack the case as quickly as possible. However, the police usually doesn't dare to guarantee that they can find the target for such cases. Klein picked up the black fountain pen on his desk and stroked it. To Mam Wahana's family, £1,000 isn't a small sum. Based on what he knew, an ordinary home tutor didn't earn more than £150 a year. If the employer provided boarding and lodging, the salary would be even lower. Although Wahana served high society and had many employers, her annual income capped out at about £400 to £500. Furthermore, a large amount of her expenses would be spent on her dressing, posture, and looks, to prevent her employers from finding her unfitting as an etiquette teacher. Yes, her husband's income as a cloth merchant can only be considered average. To him, a £1,000 investment is a rather huge investment, Walter said by mincing his words. It's a lot for me too. Klein sighed and smiled. I just came to Backland, so I'm not very familiar with the police. Walter immediately replied, Sir, back when I was under the service of Viscount Conrad, I knew a few members of a Backland high-ranking police officer association. Backland High-Ranking Police Officer Association? That would be the most important members at Civilage Yard. Even the chief superintendents who are in charge of an entire borough might not be qualified for induction. Civilage Yard referred to the Backland Police Department. It got its name from the street it was located at. As expected of a butler who served under a noble family. Klein sighed inwardly as he smiled with a shake of his head. There's no need to do so for the time being. On this aspect, I'm sure Mam Wahana is able to seek the help of many people. Be it Member of Parliament Mocked or others, all of them have the ability to make Civilage Yard place importance on the case. He paused and deliberately said in passing, I've seen the lower rungs of society, and I know their methods of survival. At times, the police might not be as useful as gang members or bounty hunters. Walter, go to the police department to retrieve the corresponding details and head over to the famous bars in the Backland Bridge area and East Borough to commission a bounty mission. Regardless if they find the corresponding criminals or the batch of cloth, I'll be giving them £200 in return. Let's hope that those cheats had chosen to remain in Backland. A reward of £200? Walter repeated the sum as he couldn't help but steal a glance at his employer, as though he found it unbelievable that he would offer so much for Wahana's matter. He turned agape and was just about to say something but ultimately kept silent. All he did was seriously reply, All right, sir. I'll give you this money directly. Klein slowly got up and took out his wallet. As Walter received the thick wad of cash, he asked in thought, Should I tell Mam Wahana? Klein smiled. There's no need. Enlightened, Walter nodded with a bow. Your generosity will spread through this street. East Borough, Dharavi Street, in a cramped but lively pub. Zio, who had seriously combed her short, blonde hair before heading out, squeezed through the area filled with men that stank of alcohol and putrid sweat and arrived at the bar counter. She tapped the counter and asked the bartender, Any new missions today? If it were anyone else who asked without ordering any drinks, the bartender would have ignored them, but upon recognizing Zio, a bounty hunter who no one wanted drinking, he could only sigh and say, A very handsome reward, £200. £200? Zio nearly suspected that she had heard wrong. Apart from Miss Audrey's missions, she had never seen such a handsome reward in East Borough or the Backland Bridge area. Even the mission to seek out Azek Eggers that drove bounty hunters crazy had only offered £150. For an ordinary bounty hunter, completing a commission like this was enough for them to not work for a year. To Zio, it was equally important because she had been helping the mysterious man in the golden mask over the past few months. She had learned that the man was from MI9, and she was trying to earn enough contributions to exchange for the interrogator potion formula. Therefore, the reward she received when completing his tasks only paid a little. Most of it was exchanged towards her contribution goals, so all her savings came from the advantages that her sheriff sequence had given her to capture criminals. Once I receive the potion formula, I still have to spend money to buy the Beyonder ingredients, and I only have £300 odd. Furs is right. Money isn't omnipotent, but it's sufficiently important. Upon having this thought, she looked at the bartender and asked cautiously, "What's the mission? Who commissioned it?" "Find a few cheats. They cheated the victim of cloth costing 1,000 pounds. As the bartender handed the details to Xiao, he said, "The person who commissioned the mission looked like a butler. He called himself Walter, and he's in service of a Mr. Dwayne Dantes from Buckland Street. If you capture the cheats or find the cloth, you can head there to retrieve the bounty." Xiao quickly flipped through the documents as something quickly formulated in her mind. She instinctively knew the direction in which to continue the investigations. "I'll take this mission," she said immediately with a nod. The bartender shrugged and said, "You aren't the only one. All the bounty hunters have taken on this mission. Besides, they have other ideas." "Like what?" Xiao asked out of curiosity. The bartender chuckled. "They say that since Mr. Dwayne Dantes is so generous, they're willing to recommend themselves if he lacks a bodyguard. However, they later gave up on the idea since being a bodyguard isn't as free as being a bounty hunter. Even having drinks will have to wait until they're given time off. That's not a problem for me, but I can only be a bounty hunter." Xiao nodded, jumped off the high stool in front of the bar counter, and didn't waste time heading for the door. The next day, just as Klein finished breakfast and was preparing to head to his garden to have a stroll to aid in his digestion, Butler Walter came in from outside and silently followed behind him until there wasn't anyone around. "Sir, there are 2 matters that need your attention," he said politely. "2 matters?" Klein was somewhat surprised. He thought that there would only be one. Walter nodded. "Yes, the first matter involves the 10% shares in the Backland Bike Company. Someone has already offered 10,000 pounds. Sir, do you still wish to continue in the bid? It has been raised to 10,000 pounds? Not bad at all." Klein deliberately acted stumped as he thought. "I'm new in Backland, and there are many things that need me to hold back on. Let's leave it at that." "All right, sir." Walter then said, "The cheats who scammed Mam Wahana's husband of the cloth have been captured. The bounty hunter has already arrived and requested payment." "That quickly?" Klein turned his head in shock as he looked at his butler. If he had taken action himself, he was indeed capable of settling it that very day. After, he had dowsing rods seeking to find people, but the problem stemmed from the fact that most bounty hunters weren't seers. Yes, perhaps it's a beyonder good at tracking and searching for people. Klein made a preliminary judgment. Walter answered in confirmation, "Yes, it's much faster than I imagined. According to that bounty hunter, she did a reverse search from black market sales before finding the cheats. The black market peddlers gave in so easily? From the looks of it, they must have been taught a lesson with the fist." Klein nodded and said, "What's that bounty hunter's name?" "She's quite capable. She calls herself Xiao," Walter answered truthfully. "No way." Klein almost stumbled. Thankfully, he had the impressive balance of a clown. After calming the upheavals through his heart while acting calm, he deliberated and said, "Keep the bounty hunter's contact method. Perhaps there might be a chance to gain her assistance in the future." "All right, sir." Walter didn't find any problems with Dwayne Dantes' instructions. Any decent member of high society kept some unofficial means to their chests. Klein didn't continue on the topic of Xiao as he tersely said, "How much was reclaimed?" The cash and the yet-to-be sold cloth from the cheats came up to about 850 pounds. Walter had apparently anticipated his employer's inquiry on the matter and had asked ahead of time. "Very good," Klein nodded and said. "After paying the bounty hunter, help her send the cheats and the goods to the nearby police station. Northborough Police Station." Wahana and her husband, Bacchus, looked at the high-ranking inspector in front of them as they asked in unison, surprise coloring their voices. "It's been found? They've been caught?" The high-ranking police inspector smiled in response. "Yes." When he informed them how much cash and cloth was left, Wahana and Bacchus heaved a collective sigh of relief. They could afford 150 pounds in losses. Furthermore, the remaining cloth still had space for greater appreciation and profit. In essence, they hadn't suffered much of a loss. They repeatedly thanked the inspector until someone invited Bacchus to identify the goods and criminals. Xianxia sat there without losing her etiquette. She smiled at the high-ranking inspector and said, "Your efficiency has exceeded my expectations. I'm very curious as to how you found the bunch of cheats." Being aware that this beautiful and elegant lady knew a member of Parliament of the House of Commons, and that she would eventually learn the truth, the high-ranking inspector didn't hide it from her. In fact, it was completed by a bounty hunter. She investigated the black market of stolen goods and quickly caught the suspects. "You even offered a bounty?" Xianxia seemed to gain a full understanding of the whole story. The inspector shook his head and said, "No, someone beat us to it. He offered £200. £200? Xianxia asked in surprise. That wasn't a small sum of money, and it even exceeded the expected profit that her husband would earn from the sale. Seeing the inspector give an affirmative reply, Xianxia couldn't help but ask, "Who was it that offered the bounty?" The bounty hunter didn't say, but accompanying her was a gentleman dressed as a butler. The inspector simply described Walter's looks. Xianxia vaguely guessed at the butler's identity as she leaned back slightly, muttering softly to herself, £200. In the afternoon, Xianxia, who came to Member of Parliament Mock's house to teach his daughter etiquette, first thanked Mam Rihanna for extending their help. After the blackish-green-haired Rihanna said a few words of humility, she asked, "Xianxia, I heard that you're Mr. Dwayne Dantes' etiquette teacher. I wonder what kind of person he is?" Xianxia deliberated and said, "He's a true gentleman. He's warm-hearted, generous, kind, educated, gentlemanly, and very knowledgeable." Rihanna nodded slightly upon hearing that before turning to look at her proud daughter and chuckled. "Unfortunately, he's a little too old, or he might make a good match. Well, I plan on inviting him to our ball this weekend." Saturday night, 8 p.m. Klein rode his high-end carriage and arrived at 39 Buckland Street, Member of Parliament Mock's house, in 2.5 minutes. After stealing a glance at the lit fountain that was sloshing with water, he buttoned his tailcoat and walked down the carriage before strolling to the house's main entrance. Richardson held an exquisitely packaged bottle of Southville red wine and followed closely behind his employer. After walking through the main door, Klein instantly saw Member of Parliament Mock and his wife, Rihanna, walk over to welcome him. The former was wearing an olive-green army officer uniform with an orange-red sash around his waist and a few medals hanging from his chest. In the Loen Kingdom, serving and retired officers enjoyed wearing their military uniforms at balls. The latter was wearing a yellow long dress with frilly sides and rarely seen, exquisite lace, making her look different from unmarried ladies. However, she also partially exposed her fair neck and her shoulders. Klein took the bottle of Southville red wine from Richardson's hand and handed it to Member of Parliament Mock before saying with a bow, "Sorry, I'm late by a few minutes." This was actually a common situation at Loen balls. Guests would rather be late by a certain amount of time than be early. This was because the masters of the house might still be busy with the final preparations with the ball. It was the worst time for them to entertain guests, but of course, one had to ensure that they weren't late by more than 10 minutes. If Xianxia hadn't specially taught him this, Klein would have definitely come early as a form of respect. "It's fine. The ball hasn't officially begun." Mock glanced at the Southville red wine as he handed it to his valet before nodding with a smile. At Loen's high society engagements, one had to bring a gift for the master if it was their first time attending a ball. Alcoholic beverages were the most welcomed, but one had to keep in mind that the first gift had to be something locally produced. After greeting Mock, Klein looked towards Mam Rihanna and saw that she had slightly raised her right hand. Hence, he took one step forward and lifted her palm and bent his back to kiss it. "You illuminate the entire ball." Before the ball began, complimenting the masters of the house was a necessary step in Loen social events. And unlike Intis, Loen's hand-kissing etiquette required the lady to gesture that it was possible before a gentleman could do the kiss, otherwise, it would be a serious faux pas. "Likewise for your arrival," Mam Rihanna replied with a smile. Then, the couple led Dwayne Dantes through the corridor and into the main hall where a pleasant tune was echoing. After taking a few steps forward, Maury Mocked pointed at a lady in a sky-blue dress. "My daughter, Hazel." Klein looked at the girl as his pupils suddenly constricted. He knew this girl. To be precise, he had seen her image before. Back when he had asked Rhodes where he could obtain a mystical item which could steal the beyonder powers of others, the magic mirror had indicated a scene of an arrogant lady loitering in the sewers, and she was none other than Hazel Mocked. She was a lady with wavy black-green hair and bright brown eyes. She has a mystical item that corresponds to a fire bandit? With her family conditions, why would she be loitering in the sewers? Is it some fortuitous encounter of hers? Was she searching for something or waiting for something in the sewers? She has already become a beyonder? How did she become one? Could it be that she has a grandpa parasitizing in her body? Klein, who was donning the skin of Dwayne Dantes, instantly thought of many questions, but he pressed his hand to his chest as he bowed with an unperturbed look. "Good evening, Miss Hazel." During this process, he stole a glance at Hazel Mock's face and discovered that she wore a composed look. There was an arrogance in her eyes, and all she did was smile politely and answer, "Good evening, Mr. Dantes." She didn't have any abnormal reaction, which means that she's unable to sense the aura of the gray fog. At the very least, there's no grandpa parasitizing her. I can't be certain for now, and I'll have to continue observing. Klein stood up straight as he took a cup of pale gold champagne from a waiter's tray. He then began chatting with Member of Parliament Maury Mocked. "I never expected you to be a major." He could tell from the epaulette on Mock's shoulder. If he was a colonel, Klein would have even suspected if the gentleman was also a beyonder, but it was hard to tell for a major. "Haha, it's nothing. There are many opportunities to render meritorious services in Balam," Maury answered. "Of course, the weather there is especially unsuitable. I've always been suggesting to the army's higher-ups to design a uniform for West Balam and to get rid of the traditional dark colors, otherwise, the officers will only feel as if they are beef waiting to be roasted." As for the enlisted soldiers, most of them wore red tops and white bottoms. Yes, the weather there is completely different from what it's like in the country. Even Desi Bay isn't that hot. Klein indicated that he had been to the southern continent, and he had been to either East or West Balam to corroborate his hunting experiences that he had mentioned a few days ago. After a few minutes of small talk, Mocked apologized and walked to the staircase with his wife. At the second floor, he raised a cup of red wine while standing by the railings facing the main door and said, "Thank you everyone for coming to our ball. First, let us toast the deities. They are the source of everything beautiful." He and Mariana tapped 4 times on their chests as they softly praised the goddess. The other guests also praised the deities they believed in via their own means. Mocked continued having his cup raised as he said with a smile, "Second, a toast to the kingdom. It is a stable bedrock. To the kingdom." Klein raised his cup of champagne and spoke with the other guests around him. Following that, Mock surveyed the area and asked humorously, "Finally, what shall we toast to?" Klein's mind whirred as he said loudly with a smile, "A toast to the improvement of the air in Backland." Mock was taken aback as he couldn't help but smile in response. "Excellent. That's a great suggestion. A toast to the improvement of Backland's air. This is a symbol of us living better lives. Cheers." The fixing of the atmospheric pollution issue had always been one of his political ideals as a House of Commons Member of Parliament. He had ultimately been pushing for the corresponding bills, and he had played a significant role in the improvement of the environment. Therefore, toasting to the improvement in Backland's air was equivalent to toasting to himself. It was more euphemistic and more aboveboard. All the guests echoed in a spirited burst as they finished the drinks in their hands. Right on the heels of that, Member of Parliament Mocked held Mariana's hand, and they went down to the hall. They then started the opening dance in the mellow music. All the gentlemen present began finding their first partners to dance. Klein took another cup of champagne as he leisurely sized up the guests. Ma'am Mary is here as well." He swept his gaze and found someone familiar. As one of the major shareholders of the Coin Company, with a wealth amounting to tens of thousands, Ma'am Mary had formerly hired Sherlock Moriarty to investigate her ex-husband's act of adultery. She's a member of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council, so it's normal that she has a close relationship with the Member of Parliament. Klein didn't attempt to invite her to a dance, since he here is Duane Dantes. He didn't know this lady who lived in another street. He retracted his gaze and looked elsewhere. He saw Hazel mocked holding a cup of white wine and standing to the side. She wore a clear smile of alienation as she watched the gentlemen lock onto their targets to invite them for a dance. This lady actually looks pretty good. She's dignified and pretty. She should have been the star at this ball, with people yearning to invite her to a dance. However, the way she exudes that look of arrogance, looking down at people with a supercilious look, makes any gentleman who casts his eyes on her shift over to another target. I've seen this look in the eyes of certain beyonders as well. They no longer think of themselves as mortal, and they often have a sense of superiority when facing ordinary folks. This implies that Miss Hazel is likely a beyonder. That's right, if she isn't a beyonder, how would she dare to loiter in the sewers? She's from the Marauder pathway? But how is she to act as a marauder or swindler with such arrogance? It's hard to imagine. Seeing that the hosts were almost done with the opening dance, he began seriously considering who he could invite. Duane Dantes is in his early 40s, so it isn't appropriate to invite a lady for his first dance, unless it's someone confirmed to be a junior. And the first dance of most ma'ams would be done with their husbands. I should be able to invite people I'm familiar with or the hosts. Klein swept the dance floor and found the only lady Duane Dantes was familiar with. It was his etiquette teacher, Juana. Invite her? No, she likely already knows that I've secretly helped her. To invite her for the first dance can easily make her misunderstand. It might even affect her relationship with her husband and incur unnecessary trouble for Duane Dantes. It's not like I'm Emperor Roselle who has a penchant for the wives of others. No, he has a penchant for everything. In short, I should avoid creating gossip. Klein shifted his gaze and heard the music change. It went from a mellow melody to something brisk. It was a piece of countryside music that was popular in central Loen. It was well liked by nobles and was often used for the first dance. With the change in music, the gentlemen walked to the ladies and madams they had selected. Klein also noticed that no one approached Hazel mocked. She's one of the hosts of this ball. Besides, I can observe her at a close distance. If she really is a beyonder of the Marauder pathway, it implies that the grey fog is able to converge beyonders from the neighboring pathways of the seer pathway. Klein wore a gentle smile as he unhurriedly walked to the arrogant lady. Miss Hazel, may I have the pleasure of a dance with you? Duane Dantes with his white sideburns gave a standard bow as he said. Hazel glanced at him and, after a few seconds of silence, said, "It will be my honor." She then extended her palm. Klein politely held her hand and entered the dance floor as they began a brisk and lively dance. Glancing at her beautiful but deadpan face, Klein said with a smile as he tried probing, "I just noticed that many young gentlemen wished to invite you to a dance, but they were unable to muster their courage." Hazel looked up and swept her gaze at him and said, "Mr. Dantes, that's not a polite topic." Klein choked, lost as to how to reply. I thought she would contemptuously say that she doesn't like immature and incapable men, hinting that she isn't impressed with ordinary people. Who knew she can't even be bothered to answer this question? This sense of superiority will easily lead to a loss of control for subsequent advancements. Klein couldn't help but lampoon inwardly. From what he knew, beyonders were only humans who had additional powers. It was equivalent to having plenty of money or status. In fact, they were still considered human and had no way of escaping human society. Only by reaching sequence 4 would one experience a qualitative change. Furthermore, most demigods continue being active in human society. Even the sequence 1 snake of fate Will Septon is being an obedient unborn fetus. Perhaps only at the level of blasphemer Amon and the others will they be able to view the real world as a god. Klein's mind whirred as he said, I'm sorry. I was once a merchant who often spent time in the northern continent and southern continent, and I have had little experience with a ball. I mean, this type of ball. It's fine, Hazel replied calmly as though she didn't care about the topic he had just raised. If it were anyone else, they would have been at a loss for a conversation with this arrogant lady. All they could do was focus on the dance, but Klein was considered quite a knowledgeable and experienced person at this point. He knew quite a bit of the different beyonders in the mysterious world, so with his apology, he said with a smile, this is a challenge that isn't simpler than the sea. It similarly has beautiful scenery but hides countless difficulties. Of course, the sea also has stories of all kinds of treasures. Some of them are clearly fake, but others sound rather realistic but are impossible to verify. It's just like Death's Key that's ranked first amongst them. Death's Key? Hazel looked up at Mr. Dwayne Dantes, who was a lot taller than her. Indeed, a beyonder with a strong sense of superiority would often have their interest piqued when it's something that involves mystery. Klein chuckled inwardly and he nodded gently. Yes, it's rumored to be hidden somewhere in the Berserk Sea. He used the legends he had heard back when he was aboard the White Agate, as he added more of the details he had heard during his career as an adventurer. During this process, he couldn't avoid mentioning the 4 kings and the 7 pirate admirals. Hazel was clearly interested in these as she responded to Klein in a rare instance. She would even occasionally ask other questions, making the dance between them less awkward. Without realizing it, their dance came to an end. Klein skillfully ended the topic and switched to asking, do you plan on returning to where you were, or do you plan on heading over to get some food? After a dance, the gentleman had to abide by the lady's wishes and send her to where she wished to go. It didn't have to be where she originally stood. Hazel opened her mouth as though she wished to ask further, but she ultimately didn't speak further. She nodded her head in a reserved manner, where I was. She clearly misses the stories at sea. She's just a big brat. As long as you grasp her temper and find what interests her, she's actually not difficult to interact with. Klein held back his smile as he sent Hazel back to the periphery of the dance floor where she previously stood. As for him, he acted casual as he walked to the long table that had all kinds of food placed on it. He picked up a plate and began to scoop a serving of pan-fried dragonbone fish, and he matched it with some sliced black pepper steak. Compared to the dance and entertaining others, food is the true essence of a gathering. As Klein thought, he worked hard at trying to make his appearance while eating appear elegant enough. At this moment, he saw Ma'am Mary walk over and fork a piece of foie gras soaked in red wine onto her plate. When Klein saw her glance at him, he politely smiled with a nod as a response. How may I address you? I haven't met you before at the balls and banquets hosted by Member of Parliament mocked. Perhaps it was because of Dwayne Dantes's grey sideburns and deep blue eyes that were very charming. The ordinary-looking Ma'am Mary with slightly high cheekbones took the initiative to ask. Klein laughed and replied, I'm a merchant who just returned from Desi Bay, Dwayne Dantes. I live on this street. Ma'am, do I have the honor of knowing your name? Mary nodded in thought, and she roughly understood this man to be a merchant who was trying hard to enter high society, just like she was previously. She said with a smile, Mary Schott, Quim Company's executive director. She didn't mention that she was the biggest shareholder of the Quim Company, or mention that she was a member of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council. This was a Loen-styled euphemism. Mary Schott. She has taken up her original last name? Right, she has already divorced. Klein silently thought to himself and said with a smile, I know of this company. Its main business is in anthracite and high-quality coal. It has expanded rapidly in the past few months. To be frank, I have the intention of investing in it, but I don't seem capable of competing with the rest. After the atmospheric bills were passed, there was a drastic increase in the demand of anthracite and high-quality coal. Quim Company managed to develop itself in ways that exceeded its past efforts. Its overall valuation had already exceeded £250,000. Klein wasn't shooting his mouth when talking about investing, but that he believed that this industry would become even more important in the coming years until humanity found a resource to replace it. Mary had always been very proud of the National Atmospheric Pollution Report she pushed for, as well as the development of the clone company, so she couldn't help but smile when she heard that. This is because people are beginning to pay attention to the environment that they are living in. Having said that, she gently sighed and said, as it gets better, trouble also increases as a result. Having just acquainted himself, Klein didn't ask about the trouble. With his prior acquaintance with Ma'am Mary, he easily found a topic of interest and had a good conversation with her. Haha, her attitude towards Sherlock Moriarty and Dwayne Dantes is very different. Despite being someone she knows, just a change in looks and identity will be given a brand new form of treatment without any problems arising. This feeling is truly magical. As they chatted, Klein felt wistful as he felt that the additional faceless potion he had consumed was quickly digesting. After a few minutes, a handsome man with bright blonde hair walked over with a cup of red wine. He smiled at Ma'am Mary and said, "Mary, what are you talking about?" "Hibbert, this is Mr. Dwayne Dantes from Desi. His experiences at sea and West Balham are truly interesting." Mary immediately introduced the two. "Dwayne, this is Mr. Hibbert Hall, the eldest son of the Earl of Eastchester. We should be calling him Lord, but he prefers people to address him as Mr. Chief Secretary. He's the Chief Secretary of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council. I've heard you mention him before." Of course, that was when the identity, Sherlock Moriarty, was still active. The Earl of Eastchester is a major noble in the nation. He's considered the top brass when it comes to high society. Klein politely bowed without appearing overly low. "Please permit me to convey my thanks as an ordinary citizen. The work of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council has allowed us to live in better living environments." Hibbert Hall was rather pleased with such sincere gratitude, so he smiled in reply. "This is all thanks to the hard work all of us have put in." By the side, Mary said with a smile, "Dwayne, don't mention such matters again. You will make Hibbert arrogant." "No, I was just joking. He's more humble than all the noble children I know. He should be having a vacation in the Eastchester County's fief at this time and spending his time hunting with his friends, but he immediately returned after I sent him a telegram informing him that I was invited to this ball by Member of Parliament Mocht. It's not only for this ball. There are many things that require my attention. My father, Earl Hall, would also frequently commute between Backland and our fief before June," Hibbert seriously explained. "A gentleman who places great importance on his social image." Klein made a preliminary judgment. When Mary heard that, she asked in passing, "Is there anything still keeping you back? When are you leaving Backland?" "Most of my work has already been completed. There's only one matter left. My sister, Audrey, is very interested in the Backland Bike Company's 10% shares. She hired a specialized team to help her in the negotiations, and I'm responsible for overseeing the matter," Hibbert said without much thought. "Backland Bike Company's 10% shares? What a coincidence. I have to say that the circle of high society is quite small after all." Klein sighed inwardly as he deliberately mentioned, "I also found a team to attempt to purchase the 10% shares, but I only managed to offer up to £9,000. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to compete with the other competitors and could only give up." Hibbert glanced at him with a look of surprise. "You have good taste." He didn't mention how much his side's bid was, to prevent his competitor from participating again. £9,000. Mary silently muttered, realizing she had underestimated Dwayne Dantes' wealth. At this moment, the music for the third dance sounded. Hibbert Hall turned to Mary and said, "May I have the pleasure of a dance with you?" "That's what I've been waiting for." Mary immediately extended her hand. This made Klein unable to exchange name cards with them. However, he wasn't in a rush, because it was still some time before the ball ended. After getting another plate of food, he enjoyed it while looking at the dance floor, admiring the madams and ladies dancing. During this process, he noticed that Member of Parliament Mocht and Ma'am Rihanna were mingling with different guests from time to time, having happy conversations with them and even dancing with them. According to Walter, after confirming the guest list, the hosts need to seriously conclude every guest's preference and background, so as to tailor a different topic of conversation or jokes for them. This is to make everyone feel as though they are being treated uniquely. Socializing in high society sure is troublesome. Haha, this might be why Loenese gentlemen tend to have receding hairlines. Klein lampooned as he sighed in reflection. He retracted his gaze and looked at his cleared plate. He seriously considered if he should invite another lady or madam to a dance, or if he should eat a little more. At this moment, he caught Hazel Mock's figure through the corner of his eye. She was heading for the third story with hurried footsteps.